After I lowered my wife into the ground, my phone rang. A woman claiming to be her secret attorney told me to leave the cemetery immediately and trust no one, especially not my own daughter. When I finally read the letter my wife left behind, I realized the family I loved was planning to destroy me. Before I tell you how I tore their perfect lives apart, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. My name is Dexter Rollins. I am 69 years old and a retired mechanical engineer. I spent 40 years of my life fixing complex machinery, diagnosing problems, and making things run smoothly. But I never realized the most broken thing in my life was my own family. I am an African-American man who worked hard to build a quiet, respectable life. My wife Valerie and I built our home in a historic neighborhood, saving every penny so our daughter Jada would never have to know the struggles we faced. We gave her everything, and in return she brought a snake into our home. Valerie passed away from cancer just 3 days ago. Her funeral was held on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. I stood by her grave staring down at the polished wood, feeling my heart shatter into a million irreparable pieces. We had been married for 43 beautiful years. She was my anchor, the brilliant accountant who managed our lives with grace and wisdom. But while I was saying my final agonizing goodbye to the only woman I ever truly loved, my daughter Jada, and her husband Brent Gallagher were entirely somewhere else in their minds. Brent is a slick, arrogant white real estate developer who always looked at me like I was a relic standing in his way. Even at my wife's grave, he was wearing a flashy tailored suit, standing a few feet away from the casket, actively pacing and whispering into his cell phone. I could hear him talking about zoning permits, commercial lots, and closing dates. He did not even bother to lower his voice to respect the dead. Beside him stood Jada, my own flesh and blood. Instead of mourning her mother, she was staring down at her feet, complaining under her breath that the cemetery dirt was ruining her expensive designer heels. Not a single tear fell from her eyes. I watched them, feeling a cold, heavy knot form in my stomach. The disrespect was so blatant, so unbelievably cruel, it felt like a physical blow to my chest. The grief was a suffocating weight pressing down on my lungs, yet my mind remained as sharp as ever. I had expected Jada to lean on me for us to comfort each other in our shared loss, but instead she had been distant, calculating, and almost impatient for the service to end. I looked at Brent, his pale skin flushed from the summer heat, still barking orders into his phone. He had never liked me, and the feeling was entirely mutual. To him, I was just an old mechanic taking up space in a neighborhood he desperately wanted to bulldoze and gentrify. I might have been grieving, but I noticed everything. I noticed how Jada kept looking at the house keys clutched in my hand. I noticed how Brent kept checking his expensive watch, rolling his eyes every time the pastor spoke. Something was profoundly wrong. They were waiting for something. Then I felt my phone vibrate intensely in my suit pocket. I stepped away from the grave, seeking a brief moment of quiet under a large oak tree, and answered the call. The voice on the other end was female, sharp, and carried absolute authority. "Mr. Rollins, my name is Sylvia Rossi. You do not know me, but I am an attorney. Your wife Valerie hired me 14 months ago." I froze completely. Valerie had been sick for over a year, fighting bravely, but she had never once mentioned a lawyer named Sylvia. Before I could process the shock or ask any questions, Sylvia Rossi cut me off with an urgent tone. "Listen to me very carefully, Mr. Rollins. You need to come to my office right now, today. And whatever you do, do not tell your daughter or your son-in-law where you are going. They have been plotting against you, and if you go back home with them, you will lose everything you own." The air suddenly felt too thin to breathe. My lungs tightened. I turned my head slowly, looking back at Jada and Brent. They were now standing close together, whispering intensely, their eyes darting suspiciously toward me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up straight. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I had to get out of that cemetery without raising their suspicion. I took a deep breath, allowing the genuine crushing exhaustion of the past few days to wash over my face, and walked slowly back toward them. My steps were heavy, deliberate. Jada finally looked up from her ruined shoes, crossing her arms. "Are we done here, Dad?" she asked, her tone entirely devoid of empathy or sorrow. "The reception is supposed to start in an hour, and Brent has a very important client stopping by the venue. I cannot believe we are standing out here baking in the sun." I nodded, rubbing my temples as if I were fighting off a severe migraine, pretending I was about to collapse from the heat and the heartbreak. "I am not feeling well, Jada. The heat is just too much for me right now. I think I just need to go home and rest. I will skip the reception today." Brent perked up instantly, practically shoving his cell phone into his pocket with a greedy glint in his eyes. "Oh, that is a real shame, Dexter. But since you are heading home, maybe we could swing by your place tomorrow morning to talk about the estate. You really should not be alone in that big house anyway. We have some great ideas to help you out." His eagerness was sickening. It was dripping with false concern. I just nodded weakly, telling them to go enjoy the reception and that I would take a cab home so they would not have to leave their important guests early. I turned and walked away, feeling their eager, predatory eyes burning into my back. As soon as I was out of the cemetery gates and completely out of their line of sight, I flagged down a passing taxi. But I did not give the driver my home address. I gave him the downtown address Sylvia Rossi had just texted me. The taxi ride to the city center felt like a surreal blur. My mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour, desperately trying to connect the dots. Valerie was a brilliant, meticulous woman. Before she retired, she was a senior corporate accountant who never missed a single misplaced decimal. She noticed everything. If she had gone out of her way to hire a secret lawyer while she was battling terminal cancer, it meant she had uncovered something utterly terrifying. Something she knew she could not even tell me until she was gone, probably to protect me from doing something reckless. When I finally arrived at Sylvia Rossi's office, the environment was sleek, modern, and highly intimidating. Sylvia met me right at the reception door. She was a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and a grave expression. She did not offer me any empty, sympathetic condolences. Instead, she guided me straight into her private office, locked the door behind us, and led me to a heavy leather chair. She placed a massive manila folder right in the center of her glass desk. On top of the stack of legal documents sat a sealed envelope. I recognized Valerie's elegant, looping handwriting on the front immediately. It simply said, "For Dexter." My eyes filled with hot tears just seeing the ink on the page. "Mr. Rollins," Sylvia said softly, her voice carrying a heavy weight. "Your wife spent the last year of her life preparing for this exact moment. She wanted me to give you this as soon as the funeral was over." My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached out and picked up the envelope. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the crisp paper inside, bracing myself for a final emotional goodbye, perhaps for words of comfort or enduring love to guide me through my grief. But that is not what Valerie wrote. There was no gentle farewell. The very first sentence on the page made my blood run completely cold. "My dear Dexter, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and it means Brent is preparing to kick you out of our house." I stared at the words, paralyzed, unable to comprehend the sheer horror of them. Brent was my son-in-law. How could he kick me out of a house I owned entirely? But as my eyes moved to the next line, the devastating, suffocating reality of my situation finally hit me. I kept reading, my vision blurring as the crisp black ink etched a nightmare into my brain. Valerie's elegant handwriting detailed a reality I could never have imagined. She wrote that Brent was not just greedy, he was dangerously desperate, and our daughter was fully aware of his plans. Jada, the little girl I carried on my shoulders, the daughter whose college tuition I paid for by taking extra overnight shifts at the engineering plant, working until my hands were blistered and numb. She had agreed to a scheme that would leave me entirely homeless. Valerie explained that she had accidentally overheard them arguing in our kitchen months ago when they thought she was asleep upstairs. They were discussing exactly how much my property was worth and how quickly they could move me into a substandard assisted living facility once Valerie passed away. Jada had complained that I was too stubborn, that I would never sell the family home willingly. Brent had reassured her, telling her not to worry because he had a foolproof legal strategy to force my hand. The betrayal was a physical weight crushing my chest. I felt like I was suffocating in that leather chair. I could perhaps understand a greedy son-in-law, a man with no blood ties looking for a quick payout. But Jada, my own flesh and blood, how could she stand by her mother's deathbed, watch me weep, and secretly plot to strip me of my dignity and the only home I had left? I looked up at Sylvia, the letter trembling violently in my hands. My throat was entirely dry. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat, choking me. Sylvia poured me a glass of water from a glass pitcher and pushed it across the desk, her expression filled with a quiet, fierce resolve. "Drink that, Mr. Rollins," she said firmly. "You are going to need your strength and a clear head for what comes next." I took a slow sip, the cold water barely easing the tightness in my throat. Why I finally managed to ask, my voice raspy. Why my house? I am just a retired mechanical engineer. We live in a modest 4-bedroom home. It is not a multi-million-dollar mansion. Sylvia leaned forward, resting her elbows on the sleek glass desk. It is not about the house itself, Dexter. It is about the dirt it sits on. You and Valerie bought that property over 40 years ago. Your neighborhood is one of the last remaining historic black communities in the city limits. And right now it is the exact epicenter of a massive gentrification project. The realization hit me like a speeding freight train. For the past 2 years, aggressive developers had been swarming our streets like absolute vultures. They were buying up properties from older residents, offering quick cash payouts that seemed generous to struggling retirees but were actually pennies on the dollar. They tore down generational homes to build luxury condos, artisanal coffee shops, and high-end commercial boutiques that none of the original residents could ever afford to shop in. I had received dozens of their glossy flyers in my mailbox and fielded countless unsolicited phone calls from pushy real estate agents. I threw every single one of them in the trash. I had spent 4 decades maintaining that house. I rewired the electricity myself, reinforced the aging foundation, and built the wraparound porch where Valerie loved to drink her morning tea. That land held our history, our legacy, and the memories of a lifetime. I was never going to sell. But apparently Brent saw my steadfast stubbornness as a hurdle he urgently needed to eliminate. Sylvia opened the thick manila folder and spread out a series of highly detailed financial documents, bank statements, and corporate filings. Your wife was a phenomenal accountant, Mr. Rollins. Even while undergoing brutal chemotherapy treatments, she managed to quietly investigate your son-in-law's business dealings. She pulled public records, tracked limited liability companies, and followed the money. What she found is alarming. Brent likes to play the part of a highly successful real estate mogul, wearing custom Italian suits and driving a leased sports car to project an image of extreme wealth. But his company, Gallagher Developments, is entirely underwater. He is currently drowning in insurmountable debt. Sylvia pointed to a document highlighted in bright red ink. Brent overleveraged himself on a failed commercial project 2 years ago. He owes over $4 million to private lenders. And these are not traditional banks, Dexter. These are shadow lenders who do not take politely negotiated payment plans. They want their money and they want it now. Brent is absolutely desperate. His life might very well be in danger if he does not pay them back soon. I stared at the staggering numbers on the page, the massive deficits Brent had accumulated behind his flashy smile. But how does my house solve his $4 million problem? I asked, tracing the numbers with my finger. Sylvia pulled out a large city zoning map and unrolled it across the desk. She tapped a silver pen directly on the square representing my property. Because your house is the cornerstone of a new mega development project. The corporate buyers have already successfully acquired all the lots around you. They want to bulldoze the entire block to build a massive commercial shopping center. But they cannot proceed without your specific plot of land. Your property is the final essential puzzle piece. If Brent can secure the deed to your house and sell it directly to these corporate buyers, he stands to make a massive commission, a commission large enough to wipe out all of his debts and put him back on top. But he knows you would never agree to sell to him. So he and Jada hatched a plan to take the choice away from you entirely. They plan to prove that you are mentally unfit to manage your own estate. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room as the full scope of their treachery settled over me. The sheer audacity of their plan made my stomach churn. While I had been sitting by my wife's hospital bed, holding her frail hand and praying for a miracle, the 2 people who should have been supporting me were actively measuring my house for demolition. They were calculating exactly how to strip away my independence, declare me legally incompetent, and lock me away in a facility just to line their own pockets. I felt a deep volcanic anger rising in my chest. It was not a fiery, explosive rage, but a cold, calculated fury. I am not going to let that happen. I stated, my voice completely steady and hardened. I will fight them with everything I have. They will not take my home. Sylvia offered a sharp, approving smile. That is exactly what Valerie hoped you would say. She prepared a highly aggressive counter-strategy for you. But before she could explain her plan, the heavy oak door to her private office swung open abruptly. A young man, Sylvia's paralegal, rushed into the room, his face flushed and his breathing heavy. Ms. Rossi, I am so sorry to interrupt a confidential meeting, he said, clutching a digital tablet tightly in his hands. But the security alerts we set up on Mr. Rollins' financial accounts just triggered a massive red flag. Sylvia stood up instantly, her professional demeanor shifting into battle mode. "What is it, Marcus? Tell me right now." Marcus looked directly at me, his expression grim and urgent. "Brent Gallagher just walked into the main branch of your bank downtown. He just submitted a power of attorney document to the branch manager claiming you are mentally incapacitated and unable to manage your own affairs. He is actively freezing your retirement accounts right this second." Sylvia did not even flinch at the news of Brent trying to freeze my accounts. She calmly picked up her desk phone, dialed a direct line to the bank executives, and informed them that a fraudulent power of attorney was being presented. She had already filed preemptive injunctions the week prior. Brent was going to be politely turned away by the tellers, completely unaware that a legal fortress had already been built around my finances. Sylvia then looked at me with a steely gaze and told me to get home immediately. She suspected that if Brent failed at the bank, he and Jada would try to secure assets directly from the house, while they thought I was still out grieving. I left the law office and took a taxi straight back to my neighborhood. The afternoon sun beat down on the historic brick homes of my street, a place where generations of hard-working black families had built their lives. I paid the driver, walked up my driveway, and unlocked my front door as quietly as possible. The house was eerily silent at first. But as I stepped into the hallway, I heard a distinct, abrasive sound coming from the second floor. It was the sound of metal scraping aggressively against metal. I moved up the carpeted stairs silently, every muscle in my body tightening with a cold, focused anger. The noise was coming from the master bedroom, the sanctuary I had shared with Valerie for over 4 decades. I pushed the door open, and the sight before me made the blood roaring in my ears come to a dead halt. Brent was standing in the corner of our bedroom, his suit jacket discarded on my bed. He had a heavy steel pry bar in his hands and was actively trying to force open the small wall safe hidden behind Valerie's vanity mirror. Jada, my own daughter, was sitting on the edge of the mattress, casually rummaging through her mother's wooden jewelry box. She was untangling a pearl necklace that I had bought Valerie for our 20th anniversary. They did not even have the decency to wait until the sun set on the day of her funeral. "What exactly do you think you are doing in my bedroom?" I asked, my voice booming through the room with the heavy, resonant authority of a man who had spent his life managing factory floors. Jada gasped, dropping the pearl necklace onto the carpet as if it burned her. Brent, however, did not even flinch. He slowly lowered the pry bar, completely devoid of any guilt or shame. He turned around to face me, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, and let out a heavy, condescending sigh. He looked at me not as a father-in-law, but as a nuisance he was entirely tired of dealing with. "We are securing the estate," Dexter Brent said smoothly, straightening his shirt cuffs. "With Valerie gone, this house is too much for you to manage. We needed to make sure her valuables were properly documented before you misplaced them or forgot where they were." "Forgot where they were," I repeated, stepping further into the room. "You bring a crowbar into my home hours after my wife is put in the ground, and you want to tell me you are doing inventory." Jada stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "Dad, please calm down. You are getting worked up, and it is not good for your blood pressure. You know your memory has been slipping lately. Brent is just trying to help us get organized." My memory has been slipping. I stared at my daughter, absolutely appalled by the words coming out of her mouth. Brent reached into his back pocket and pulled out a glossy, high-quality brochure. He walked over and slapped it down onto my dresser. It was a pamphlet for a luxury assisted living facility named Oakwood Pines. I looked down at the smiling, heavily sedated-looking seniors on the cover, and then back up at the arrogant smirk on Brent's face. "You are not thinking clearly, Dexter," Brent said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "You have been wandering around the house, leaving doors unlocked. Jada told me you even left the gas stove running twice last month. You are becoming a danger to yourself. It is time to face reality. You are grieving, you are confused, and you are senile. You need round-the-clock care. Sign the house over to my development firm, and I will personally ensure you get a premium room at this facility. All your expenses will be covered." I looked at Jada, waiting for her to defend me, to tell her husband that he was lying. I had never left a stove on in my life. But Jada simply avoided my gaze and nodded. "It is for the best, Dad. You cannot stay here alone. You need to sign the property transfer so we can take care of you." They were actively gaslighting me. They were fabricating symptoms of dementia to build a legal case against my sanity right to my face. The anger inside me was a towering inferno. I wanted to grab Brent by his tailored collar and throw him down the staircase. I wanted to scream at Jada and ask her how she could sell her soul to a man who looked at our family legacy as nothing more than a real estate flip. But I remembered Sylvia's words in the office. If I lost my temper, if I yelled or became violent, I would give them exactly the ammunition they needed to call the police and prove I was unstable. I had to play the game better than they did. I had to be the engineer I was trained to be, calculating the pressure points, waiting for the perfect moment to dismantle the machine. So I swallowed my pride. I let my shoulders slump forward, forcing my posture to shrink. I made my hands tremble slightly as I reached out and picked up the glossy brochure for the nursing home. I looked at it with wide, uncertain eyes, mimicking the exact vulnerability they expected to see. "I do not know," I said, allowing my voice to waver, softening the hard edges of my tone. "Everything is just moving so fast. My head hurts. I just buried your mother this morning. I cannot make a decision like this right now. It is all too much for me." Brent exchanged a quick, victorious glance with Jada. He thought he had broken me. He thought the grief had completely eroded my spine. He stepped forward, putting a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. "I know it is hard, Dexter. Change is always frightening for people your age. But this neighborhood is not safe for a confused old man anymore. We will give you the weekend to process everything. But come Monday, we are bringing the transfer paperwork for you to sign. It is happening whether you like it or not. We are doing this for your own good. Just give me the weekend." I mumbled, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor, playing the part of the defeated elder to absolute perfection. "Just let me rest." Jada picked up her designer purse, stepping over her mother's pearl necklace without a second thought. "Get some sleep, Dad. We will be back on Monday to finalize the details. Pack a bag." They walked past me, their footsteps echoing down the hallway and out the front door. I stood perfectly still in the center of my bedroom, listening intently until I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing and the sound of Brent's sports car roaring out of my driveway. As soon as the house was silent, my posture snapped back to normal. The trembling in my hands ceased entirely. I stood tall, the engineered frailty vanishing in a single second. I reached into the breast pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was illuminated, displaying an active voice recording app. I tapped the red button, stopping the recording, and saved the file. I had captured every single word. The extortion, the fabricated stories about my memory, the threats to force me into a home. It was all securely digitized. I walked over to the bed to pick up Valerie's pearl necklace, securing it back in its rightful place. But as I glanced over at the wooden jewelry box, my eyes darted to the small leather valet tray where I always kept my emergency credit cards and spare cash. The tray had been shifted. I quickly opened my wallet and checked the card slots. My primary checking card was there, but my high-limit platinum emergency card was completely gone. I closed my wallet, a cold, predatory smile slowly forming on my face. They thought they had outsmarted a senile old man. But by stealing that specific credit card, Brent and Jada had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to initiate the total destruction of their financial lives. The mourning period was officially over. It was time to go to war. The morning after the funeral, I did not wake up with the heavy, paralyzing fog of grief that had consumed me for the past week. I woke up with the sharp, blinding clarity of a man who had just realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield. I put on my best tailored suit, the dark charcoal one I wore to corporate board meetings before I retired, and took a cab straight to the main branch of my bank. Sylvia Rossi was already waiting for me by the heavy glass doors. We walked together into the private office of the branch manager, a meticulous man named Mr. Mitchell, who had handled my accounts for over 20 years. Sylvia did not waste a single second with pleasantries or condolences. She placed her heavy leather briefcase on his mahogany desk and demanded to see the exact paperwork Brent Gallagher had attempted to file the previous afternoon. Mr. Mitchell slid a manila folder across the table, looking incredibly uncomfortable. Inside was a forged power of attorney document. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was a remarkably good imitation of my handwriting, but as a mechanical engineer, my entire career was based on noticing structural flaws. The pressure of the pen was entirely wrong. The slant of the letters too aggressive, lacking the smooth, methodical curve I had developed over decades of drafting blueprints. Brent had actually sat down, forged my name on a binding legal document, and attempted to strip me of my financial independence while I was actively burying my wife. Sylvia formally invalidated the document right then and there, establishing a maximum security lock on my identity and all associated accounts. Brent had tried to cut off my lifeline, but he had no idea he was playing chess against a grandmaster who had already anticipated his opening move. With my primary account secured, it was time to initiate the first phase of my retaliation. I looked at Mr. Mitchell and told him to pull up every single account credit line and authorized user profile attached to my name. For the past 3 years, I had allowed Jada to carry a supplementary platinum credit card for emergencies. I paid the bill every single month without question, trusting my daughter to use it responsibly. I told Mr. Mitchell to cancel it. My voice was completely devoid of any hesitation. I ordered him to cancel every supplementary card immediately and permanently. But I did not stop there. I instructed the manager to open the joint savings account Valerie and I had maintained for over a decade. The balance sat at exactly $100,000. We had spent years scraping that money together, skipping vacations, driving old cars, and delaying home repairs. It was supposed to be a business loan for Jada and Brent, a generous gift we planned to give them to help Gallagher Developments get through a tough quarter. We had wanted to secure our daughter's future. Now knowing Brent was deeply in debt to shadow lenders and planning to throw me into a nursing home to steal my land, that money felt radioactive. I ordered the bank manager to withdraw every single cent of that $100,000. I transferred the entire balance directly into an impenetrable blind trust managed entirely by Sylvia's law firm. In a matter of 5 minutes, I completely severed the financial oxygen line they had been secretly breathing through for years. I wiped their safety net off the face of the earth, leaving them financially stranded without a single warning. Before we concluded the meeting, Mr. Mitchell printed out the final clearing statements for Valerie's personal accounts. Since I was the primary executor of her estate, I needed to review the final charges before the accounts could be officially closed. I ran my finger down the printed ledger, my eyes scanning the dates and the vendors. Suddenly, my breath hitched. I stopped on a series of massive charges made just 2 months ago. $5,000 to a luxury ski resort in Aspen, $2,000 for first-class airline tickets, $800 at a high-end mountain spa. I felt a cold, sickening wave of nausea wash over my entire body. 2 months ago was the absolute lowest point of Valerie's battle with cancer. She was confined to a sterile hospital bed, her body failing, her voice barely above a whisper. During those exact dates, I had called Jada begging her to come to the hospital because the doctor said Valerie might not make it through the weekend. Jada had cried hysterically on the phone, telling me she was entirely too overwhelmed with grief, that she could not bear to see her mother in that frail condition, and that she needed to stay home to protect her own mental health. But she was not at home grieving. She had stolen her dying mother's credit card out of her purse and flown to a luxury ski resort with Brent. They were sipping champagne, eating expensive dinners and getting deep tissue massages while I sat in a dimly lit hospital room holding my wife's trembling hand and listening to the steady, heartbreaking beep of her heart monitor. The level of depravity required to steal from a dying woman, let alone your own mother, was beyond my comprehension. Any lingering trace of paternal weakness, any small voice in my head hoping this was all a terrible misunderstanding, was instantly incinerated. Jada was no longer my little girl. She was a willing accomplice to a monster, and I was going to treat her exactly like one. I pointed to the most recent charge on the statement, a pending authorization from the platinum card Brent had stolen from my bedroom yesterday. He was planning to use it tonight. I looked at Mr. Mitchell and gave him one final instruction. I told him not to simply cancel the stolen platinum card, but to flag it as stolen and initiate an immediate fraud protocol the very next time it was swiped at any terminal. I returned to my quiet, empty house that evening, feeling an unprecedented sense of calm. I brewed a fresh pot of black coffee, sat in my favorite armchair by the living room window, and simply waited for the inevitable explosion. I did not have to wait long. At exactly 8 o'clock, my cell phone began to vibrate violently against the glass of the coffee table. The caller ID flashed Brent's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee before finally pressing the button to answer. I did not say a word. I just held the phone to my ear, listening to the chaos on the other side. Brent was practically hyperventilating, the background noise indicating he was in a very crowded, very expensive restaurant. "Dexter, what the hell is going on?" Brent roared, his voice a frantic, panicked hiss, as he desperately tried to stay quiet enough not to cause a scene in public. "I am at an exclusive dinner with 3 of the biggest corporate investors in the city. I just handed the waiter your platinum card to cover the $4,000 bill, and he came back and told me the card was declined. He literally cut the card in half in front of my entire table. He said it was flagged for fraud. Call the bank right now and fix this. They are looking at me like I am some kind of broke con artist." I smiled in the darkness of my living room, a cold, hard expression forming on my face. "You are a broke con artist, Brent," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and dripping with absolute disdain. "The card is canceled. And by the way, if you ever steal from my bedroom again, I will have you arrested for burglary. Figure out how to pay your own bills." I lowered the phone and pressed the end button, cutting off his desperate, humiliating screams. I tossed the phone onto the cushion beside me and took another slow sip of my coffee, plunging my house back into total, beautiful silence. The silence of my living room was shattered less than an hour later. The heavy oak front door flew open with such violent force that the brass doorknob punched a hole straight through the drywall. Brent stormed into the hallway, his expensive suit jacket missing his tie yanked loose and his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He was breathing heavily, reeking of premium scotch and raw desperation. Without a single word of greeting, he grabbed a ceramic vase from the entryway table and hurled it directly at the hardwood floor. It shattered into 100 pieces, the loud crash echoing through the quiet house. I did not flinch. I remained seated in my armchair, watching him unravel like a spoiled child throwing a violent tantrum. The polished, sophisticated mask of the successful real estate developer completely melted away, revealing the entitled, greedy monster underneath. "You think you are smart." "Old man," Brent screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You think cutting off a credit card is going to stop me? I was humiliated in front of men who own half the city. You embarrassed me." I looked at him with absolute disgust. "You embarrassed yourself, Brent. You tried to pay for a luxury dinner with money you stole from a grieving widower." But Brent was beyond reason. The polite facade he had maintained for years vanished, exposing his deep-seated prejudice and arrogant entitlement. He paced the room, kicking pieces of the broken vase. "You people are all the exact same," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You sit on prime real estate, living in the past, holding on to these run-down historic neighborhoods like they actually mean something. You do not belong in the new vision for this city. You are a stubborn old relic standing in the way of progress. I am going to tear this entire block down, and I am going to start with this pathetic house. You are nothing but an obsolete stepping stone, and I will not let you ruin my future." Just then, Jada stepped through the broken doorway. I looked at my daughter, waiting for her to reprimand her husband for destroying my property and speaking to me with such vile, racist disrespect. Instead, she carefully stepped over the broken ceramic shards, her expression completely hardened. She crossed her arms over her chest and looked at me, not with love, but with a cold, calculating annoyance. "Stop throwing a fit, Dad," Jada said, her tone flat and devoid of any warmth. "You are acting exactly like an unstable patient. You are making this so much harder than it has to be. You cut off my credit cards. You embarrassed my husband. Just accept reality. You cannot manage your finances anymore, and you certainly cannot manage this house alone." I slowly stood up from my armchair, drawing myself up to my full height. The betrayal stung, but the anger was a powerful anesthetic. "Accept reality," I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "The reality is that while your mother was lying in a hospital bed taking her last breaths, you were getting a deep tissue massage in Aspen using her credit card." Jada visibly recoiled. Her eyes widened, and the arrogant posture faltered for a fraction of a second. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "You did not even have the decency to mourn her," I continued, taking a deliberate step toward them. "You traded your family legacy for a man who views your heritage as dirt to be paved over. This house was built on the sweat and sacrifice of a family you just sold out for a lifestyle you cannot even afford. Now both of you will get out of my house." Brent stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "You cannot kick us out. We are family and we have legal rights." I walked directly up to him, stopping mere inches from his face. "I spent 40 years working in heavy machinery. I know exactly how to break things apart. Do not test me in my own home. Get out, now." Jada grabbed Brent by the arm, pulling him back toward the door. "Fine," she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "But this is not over. We are doing this the hard way." They turned and walked out, slamming the damaged front door behind them. I stood in the hallway until the sound of their car engine faded down the street. I did not go to sleep. I knew exactly what kind of people I was dealing with now, and I refused to be a victim in my own sanctuary. I went straight to my garage workshop. I am a retired mechanical engineer. I spent my entire life designing systems, fixing vulnerabilities, and building structures meant to withstand immense pressure. Securing a residential property was a simple task. I pulled out 3 heavy-duty commercial-grade deadbolts I had purchased years ago for a project I never finished. I removed the old locks from the front door, the back patio door, and the side garage entrance. I worked methodically, the physical labor keeping my mind completely focused. By 2 in the morning, the house was physically impenetrable. No old keys would work, but physical locks were not enough. I needed eyes on the perimeter. As soon as the hardware stores opened at dawn, I drove across town and purchased a comprehensive high-definition surveillance system. I spent the entire morning running wires through the attic, mounting cameras at every possible entry point. I placed 1 facing the driveway, 1 covering the front porch, and 2 securing the backyard. I synced the entire network to a private server on my laptop and linked it directly to my smartphone. I tested the motion sensors, ensuring that if Brent or Jada so much as set a foot on my property line, I would instantly receive a loud notification. I swept up the broken ceramic in the living room and repaired the drywall where Brent had slammed the door. I was preparing for a siege. They thought I was a vulnerable, lonely old man who would simply fold under pressure. They severely underestimated the resilience of a man who had spent his life building fortresses out of steel and concrete. My home was officially locked down, and I was ready for whatever cowardly tactic they tried to deploy next. I knew they were desperate, and desperate people always make terrible mistakes. I finally sat down at the kitchen table around 9 o'clock the next morning. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the clean, quiet house. I placed my smartphone on the table, the screen displaying a split grid of my 4 brand-new security cameras. Everything was peaceful. The neighborhood was quiet, the morning sun casting a warm glow over my front lawn. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a sense of deep satisfaction. I had reclaimed my territory. But that peace was incredibly short-lived. My phone screen lit up with a bright red motion alert. A sleek silver sedan pulled into my driveway. I watched the live feed as a man stepped out of the vehicle. He was not Brent, and he was not a police officer. He was a middle-aged white man wearing a tailored gray suit, carrying a thick black leather medical bag and a silver clipboard. I watched him walk up the pathway and press my doorbell. The chime echoed through the hallway. I walked to the door, peering through the reinforced peephole before sliding the heavy deadbolt back. I opened the door just a few inches, leaving the steel security chain firmly attached. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and guarded. The man offered a polite practice smile that did not reach his cold eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Rollins. My name is Dr. Harrison. Your daughter Jada contacted my clinic late last night. I am here to conduct a mandatory cognitive assessment and mental competency evaluation. She has expressed extreme concern regarding your mental decline, and I need to come inside to begin the examination right away." I unlatched the heavy steel security chain and swung the front door open, allowing Dr. Harrison to step into my foyer. He wiped his polished leather shoes on my welcome mat and looked around my meticulously clean home with an air of calculated judgment. He had the arrogant posture of a man who was used to making quick, devastating decisions about other people's lives for a generous fee. I knew exactly what he was here to do. Brent and Jada had paid him to build a fabricated medical foundation for their legal assault. If I threw him out or lost my temper, he would simply write in his official report that I was hostile, paranoid, and severely mentally unstable. I had to play a much more sophisticated game. I had to be the engineer. When you test a faulty machine, you do not hit it with a hammer. You feed it specific variables and watch how it processes the data. I decided to feed Dr. Harrison the exact data he desperately wanted to find. I ushered him into the living room and slowly lowered myself into my armchair, making sure my joints appeared stiffer than they actually were. I let my shoulders slump, erasing the commanding posture I had used to throw Brent out of the house the night before. Dr. Harrison sat across from me, pulling a silver pen from his breast pocket and clicking it with a sharp, irritating snap. He offered a fake, comforting smile. "Mr. Rollins," he began softly, his tone dripping with patronizing sympathy, "I am very sorry for the loss of your wife. Grief can be an incredibly heavy burden. Your daughter Jada is extremely worried about you. She mentioned you have been experiencing some severe memory lapses lately. Can you tell me what day of the week it is and what you had for breakfast this morning?" I looked down at my hands deliberately, letting a slight tremor shake my fingers. I paused for a long, uncomfortable moment, projecting the image of an old man struggling to navigate a dense mental fog. "I do not know, doctor," I mumbled, keeping my voice low and weary. "The days just seem to bleed together since Valerie passed. I think it is Thursday, or maybe Friday. I just had some toast, I think." I watched carefully as Dr. Harrison quickly jotted down a note on his clipboard, his fake smile widening just a fraction of an inch. He was taking the bait. He proceeded to ask me a series of loaded, manipulative questions designed to confuse me. He asked about my finances, subtly suggesting that paying bills must be too overwhelming for me now. He asked about the stove, bringing up the fabricated story Jada had fed him. I played my part to absolute perfection. I gave him answers that were vague, slightly bewildered, but completely cooperative. I made him feel entirely in control. By the time he stood up to leave, he looked incredibly satisfied. He patted my shoulder gently and told me he would be submitting his preliminary evaluation to my daughter by the end of the day. He thought he had successfully secured his dirty paycheck. But all he had really done was give me the false sense of security I needed him to pass along to Brent. The moment the doctor's silver sedan disappeared down the street, my posture straightened. The engineered frailty vanished completely. I walked directly to my study and unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out a heavy leather-bound address book. Sylvia Rossi was handling the corporate and legal warfare, but I needed someone who operated entirely outside the polite bounds of the courtroom. I needed eyes in the shadows. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the number for Kendrick Hayes. Kendrick and I grew up on the same block. We had known each other since we were teenagers playing basketball on the neighborhood courts. He had spent 25 years as a decorated city detective before retiring to open an elite private investigation firm. He was meticulous, relentless, and fiercely loyal to the people he cared about. Within an hour, Kendrick was sitting at my kitchen table drinking a cup of dark roast coffee while I briefed him on the entire situation. Kendrick was a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man with sharp, philosophical eyes that missed absolutely nothing. His expression turned to cold stone as I explained the fraudulent power of attorney, the stolen credit cards, the extortion attempt, and the corrupt medical doctor who had just left my living room. I handed Kendrick a file containing Brent's business address, his vehicle license plate, and a list of his known associates. "I want to know everything about him." I told Kendrick, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I want to know about the $4 million he owes to shadow lenders. I want to know every dirty secret he is hiding behind that tailored suit." Kendrick nodded slowly, pulling out a small digital notepad and sliding the file into his jacket. "If your son-in-law is swimming in $4 million of underground debt, he is a desperate man," Kendrick said firmly. "Desperate men always leave a trail of reckless mistakes. I will put a tail on him today. We will wire his life and we will wait for him to hang himself." Kendrick did not waste a single minute. By early afternoon, he had located Brent's leased sports car parked outside a high-end commercial real estate office downtown. Kendrick was an absolute ghost in the field. Wearing a generic municipal utility uniform, he seamlessly blended into the background of a maintenance crew working near the parking garage. Using his decades of tactical experience, it took him less than 60 seconds to slip a state-of-the-art GPS tracker and a high-frequency audio transmitter deep underneath the chassis of Brent's vehicle. By the time Brent walked out of his office completely unaware of his surroundings, his entire life was broadcasting directly to a secure encrypted server on my laptop. I sat in my home office later that afternoon wearing a pair of noise-canceling headphones listening to the feed. As a mechanical engineer, I deeply appreciated the flawless clarity of Kendrick's technology. I heard the heavy thud of Brent slamming his car door, followed by a frustrated guttural scream. He aggressively punched a number into his car's Bluetooth system. The phone rang twice before a gruff, dangerous-sounding voice answered. Brent immediately started pleading with the man, his sophisticated corporate tone entirely replaced by frantic, vibrating fear. "Look, I told you I'm securing the property this week." Brent stammered, his breathing heavy and erratic. "The old man is completely losing his mind. I had a doctor evaluate him this morning. We are getting medical guardianship by the end of the month. The land will be mine, and you will get your $4 million with a massive interest bonus. Just give me 30 more days." The voice on the other end of the line was brutally calm. The man did not care about Brent's timeline or his medical evaluations. The man told Brent that if the money was not deposited by the end of the month, his crew would stop negotiating and start breaking bones. The line clicked dead. Brent let out another agonizing scream, violently punching his steering wheel. He was a cornered animal suffocating under the weight of his own greed. And cornered animals always expose their most fatal weaknesses. The sun eventually dipped below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across my lawn. I was still sitting at my desk when my secure phone chimed with a high-priority encrypted message from Kendrick. I opened the notification immediately. Kendrick had tailed Brent from his corporate office straight to the underground parking garage of a luxury boutique hotel on the wealthy side of town. The message contained a series of high-resolution photographs captured through a powerful telephoto lens. I clicked on the first image, my jaw tightening in absolute disgust. Brent was not meeting with corporate investors. He was standing by the secluded VIP elevator banks, his hands wrapped tightly around the waist of a tall, beautiful white woman. She was wearing a sleek, highly professional dress, laughing brightly as Brent leaned in and kissed her passionately on the mouth. My own daughter had sold out her family legacy, plotted against her grieving father, and betrayed her dying mother for this man. She thought she was building an empire with a successful real estate mogul. But in reality, he was actively betraying her in a hotel lobby with a complete stranger. Kendrick's follow-up text arrived a second later, illuminating the entire twisted picture. Her name is Meredith, Kendrick wrote. She is the lead commercial real estate broker orchestrating the corporate buyout of your neighborhood. They just booked a penthouse suite for the night. The morning sun barely pierced the heavy curtains of my study when Kendrick Hayes arrived at my back door. He did not bother with pleasantries. He walked straight into my kitchen, poured himself a mug of black coffee, and dropped a massive, tightly bound dossier onto the center of my dining table. The sheer weight of the file sounded like a brick hitting the wood. Kendrick sat across from me, his face carved from stone, and told me to open it. I flipped open the heavy cardboard cover. Inside was a meticulously documented timeline of Brent Gallagher's total financial ruin. Kendrick had tapped into underground networks, pulling ledgers that regular banks did not even know existed. Brent was not just a failing real estate developer. He was a dead man walking. I stared at the highlighted bank transfers, the desperate loan applications, and the terrifying contracts he had signed with a syndicate of shadow lenders operating out of the city's industrial district. He owed them $4 million, plus an exorbitant interest rate that compounded weekly. These were not men who sent polite collection letters or filed civil lawsuits. These were men who broke kneecaps and made people disappear. Kendrick tapped a photograph of a notorious enforcer standing menacingly outside Brent's corporate office just 3 days prior. Brent was completely out of time. His creditors had given him a strict 30-day deadline to hand over the cash, or they were going to start taking pieces of his life. That was why he was so incredibly frantic to steal my house and sell my land to the corporate developers. He needed my property to save his own skin. He was willing to destroy my life, lock me in a mental institution, and pave over my family legacy just to pay off the violent criminals he had foolishly gotten into bed with. I thought the revelation of Brent's criminal debt was the lowest point, but Kendrick was not finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek digital tablet. He told me that when he planted the tracking device on Brent's car, he also hacked into the vehicle's interior security camera. He tapped the screen and slid the tablet across the table. The video feed was crystal clear, recorded just yesterday afternoon. Brent was in the driver's seat navigating through downtown traffic. Sitting right next to him in the passenger seat was Jada, my daughter, my own flesh and blood. They were sipping sparkling water from travel tumblers, looking entirely relaxed. I watched the screen, my heart turning to absolute ice as Jada turned to Brent with a bright, enthusiastic smile. She asked him how the meeting with Dr. Harrison went. Brent laughed, telling her that I had completely fallen for the act, playing the confused, stumbling old man perfectly. He said the corrupt doctor was writing up the incompetence report as they spoke. Jada did not look conflicted. She did not look like a daughter making a difficult, painful medical decision for an ailing father. She threw her head back and laughed. It was a cold, piercing sound that shattered every remaining illusion I held on to. Once we get the judge to sign the guardianship order, we can dump him in Oakwood Pines by the end of the month, Jada said cheerfully, her eyes sparkling with pure greed. We sell the house, close the corporate deal, and pay off your little debt. And with the leftover cash, we are booking that month-long luxury yacht cruise through the Mediterranean. I deserve a vacation after dealing with all this funeral drama. I sat perfectly still, staring at the frozen image of my daughter's smiling face on the tablet. In that precise second, the final thread of my paternal love completely evaporated. The father who had worked double shifts to buy her a graduation dress was dead. He died alongside his wife, Valerie. I closed the tablet and handed it back to Kendrick. I felt no sorrow. I felt no pity. Every ounce of my being was now dedicated to their total destruction. I left Kendrick at the house, monitoring the surveillance feeds, and took a discreet cab straight to Sylvia Rossi's law firm. When I walked into her private office, I did not look like a grieving widower anymore. I looked like a man preparing for absolute war. I placed Kendrick's dossier right in the middle of her glass desk and handed her the encrypted flash drive containing the interior dashcam footage of Jada and Brent. Sylvia spent the next 20 minutes reviewing the shadow lender contracts, the forged documents, and the horrifying video recording of my daughter plotting my institutionalization. When Sylvia finally looked up, her eyes were sharp, calculating, and entirely devoid of mercy. She leaned back in her leather chair and steepled her fingers. "They are building a guillotine for you, Dexter," she said calmly, "but they are too arrogant to check the structural integrity of the blade. We are going to let them pull the lever, and we are going to watch it drop right on their own necks." I nodded, completely aligned with her vision. I asked her what our exact countermeasure was going to be. Sylvia opened her desk drawer and pulled out a stack of blank legal affidavits. "First, we are going to secure independent medical evaluations from 3 of the top neurologists in the state. We will have certified, indisputable proof that your cognitive function is perfectly intact. Second, we are preparing a massive countersuit for elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit extortion. But we are not going to file it yet. We are going to wait until they stand in front of a family court judge and present their fraudulent evidence. We are going to let Jada and Brent commit perjury under oath on the public record. Once they lie to the judge, they cross the line from a civil dispute directly into a federal crime." I signed every piece of preparatory paperwork Sylvia placed in front of me. I felt the cold precision of an engineer tightening the bolts on a massive steel trap. I returned to my home late in the afternoon. The neighborhood was quiet, the historic brick houses glowing under the fading evening sun. I walked up my driveway, unlocked my reinforced front door, and stepped into the quiet sanctuary of my hallway. I had barely taken off my suit jacket when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed from the front porch. I checked my phone screen, viewing the live feed from my security cameras. 2 uniformed police officers were standing on my welcome mat. I opened the door, my posture perfectly composed. One of the officers stepped forward, his expression strictly professional, and handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with the official stamp of the county family court. "Mr. Dexter Rollins?" the officer asked. I nodded, confirming my identity. "You have been officially served," he stated simply before turning around and walking back to his patrol cruiser. I closed the heavy door and locked the deadbolt. I stood in the dimly lit hallway and tore open the envelope. Inside was an emergency legal summons. Jada had officially filed a petition to strip me of my civil rights, demanding immediate and total legal guardianship over my life, my health, and my estate. She cited severe cognitive decline and extreme financial vulnerability. I looked at the bottom of the document where the court clerk had stamped the official hearing date. The trial was scheduled to take place in exactly 10 days. The countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. I stood in the dimly lit hallway staring at the official court summons in my hand. 10 days. That was all the time remaining before my own daughter stood in front of a judge and tried to legally declare me a broken, senile old man. I did not feel panic. I did not feel the crushing weight of sorrow that had anchored me to the floor just days ago. I walked slowly into the living room and approached the brick fireplace. The wooden mantel was lined with silver and mahogany frames, photographs of Jada taking her first steps. Jada, at her high school graduation, smiling brightly in her cap and gown. Jada dancing with me at her wedding, a day I had paid for with my own sweat and savings. I looked at those smiling faces, and I felt absolutely nothing. The daughter in those pictures was dead. The woman who had sent a corrupt doctor to my house and filed emergency guardianship papers was an active threat, a predator looking to strip the meat from my bones. I reached up and took every single frame down from the mantel. I methodically removed the heavy cardboard backings and pulled the glossy photographs out from behind the glass. I tossed the empty frames onto the floor and carried the stack of photos out to the heavy iron fire pit in my backyard. The evening air was cool, but the fire I built roared to life within seconds. I stood there in the dark, tossing the photographs into the flames one by one. I watched the edges curl and blacken the smiling face of my daughter, blistering and turning to gray ash. The smoke rose into the night sky, carrying away 40 years of unconditional paternal love. It was a deeply profound psychological shift. I was no longer a father trying to understand his rebellious child. I was a soldier standing on a battlefield, and Jada had chosen to fight for the enemy. I watched the final photograph disintegrate into embers. The emotional detachment was now absolute. I turned my back on the fire, my mind entirely clear, ready to execute the total destruction of Brent Gallagher and the woman who stood beside him. As I walked back into my quiet house, I thought about the sheer scale of the greed that had brought us to this point. It was not just about Brent needing a quick payout to cover his gambling and shadow loans. It was about the systemic destruction of our community. Our neighborhood was established over 70 years ago by hardworking African-American families who were legally barred from buying property anywhere else in the city. Men and women like my parents and eventually Valerie and myself had pooled our resources, supported local businesses, and built a thriving, close-knit community out of nothing. But over the past decade, the city's demographics began to shift. The corporate developers, the faceless billionaires sitting in high-rise boardrooms, suddenly decided our historic streets were prime real estate. They called it urban revitalization. We called it exactly what it was: gentrification. They sent aggressive real estate agents like Brent and his mistress Meredith to scour our blocks, knocking on doors and offering aging widows fast cash for their generational homes. They preyed on the desperate and the uninformed. One by one, the historic brick houses were being demolished, replaced by sterile luxury apartment buildings, high-end yoga studios, and overpriced commercial centers designed for a completely different tax bracket. Brent was acting as the ruthless middleman for these massive corporate entities. He had promised the corporate buyers that he could deliver the entire block, allowing them to construct a multi-million-dollar shopping plaza right on top of our history. My house was situated at the exact geographical center of the proposed development. I was the final holdout. Brent was so blinded by his own financial desperation and arrogant entitlement that he believed he could simply steamroll an old black man and claim his multi-million-dollar commission. He viewed my life's work as nothing more than an obstacle in his lucrative corporate blueprint. The next morning, I took the court summons directly to Sylvia Rossi's office. I did not need an appointment. She waved me right into her private suite, her sharp eyes scanning the legal document I placed on her glass desk. She read the guardianship petition, letting out a short, cynical laugh. "They are moving exactly as Valerie predicted," Sylvia said, tossing the document aside as if it were a meaningless piece of trash. "Brent is trying to use the family court system to forcefully evict you, bypass the standard property sale procedures, and hand your deed directly to his corporate investors before his shadow lenders run out of patience. But he is playing a game he has already lost." Sylvia stood up and walked over to a heavy fireproof filing cabinet in the corner of her office. She unlocked it and pulled out a sleek black binder. She returned to the desk and placed it firmly in front of me. "I told you your wife was a phenomenal corporate accountant, Dexter. Valerie did not just spend her final months tracking Brent's dirty money and discovering his massive debts. She actively laid a concrete trap that he is currently sprinting right into." I opened the black binder. Inside were complex articles of incorporation tax identification numbers and state registry documents. It was all for a company called Apex Heritage Holdings, a limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware. I looked up at Sylvia, completely confused. "I have never heard of this company in my life," I stated. Sylvia smiled, her eyes gleaming with absolute triumph. "Because it is a highly secured shell company, Dexter. Valerie set it up in absolute secrecy 14 months ago. She structured the LLC so that it traces back to a registered agent in Delaware, making the true ownership completely invisible to public record searches. Brent and his corporate developers ran their standard background checks on your property. They saw that your residential deed is owned by you and Valerie. They assumed that getting you out of the house would give them total freedom to bulldoze the property and build their commercial shopping plaza. But Brent is a sloppy, arrogant developer who skipped the deepest levels of due diligence." Sylvia leaned across the desk, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. 2 years ago, Valerie inherited a significant sum of money from her late uncle's estate. You thought she put that money into a long-term mutual fund. She did not. Valerie recognized the aggressive gentrification happening in your neighborhood. She knew the corporate developers were coming for your block. So she used Apex Heritage Holdings and every single penny of her inheritance to quietly approach the City Planning Commission. Sylvia pulled a heavily stamped, notarized legal deed from the back of the binder and slid it directly into my hands. I stared at the dense legal jargon, my heart hammering against my ribs as the sheer brilliance of my late wife's strategy finally washed over me. "Brent does not know that your wife used her inheritance to buy the exclusive commercial zoning rights for this entire neighborhood. 6 months ago," Sylvia said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a death sentence. "He can try to steal your house. He can try to evict you. But without your explicit signature as the sole surviving managing director of Apex Heritage Holdings, it is legally impossible to build a single commercial structure on that land." Brent's multi-million-dollar development deal is already entirely worthless, and he does not even know it yet. I left Sylvia Rossi's office that afternoon with a dangerous new weapon in my arsenal. But before we could deploy Valerie's brilliant legal trap in court, I needed to strike a devastating psychological blow. Kendrick had informed me earlier that Brent was hosting a massive, highly exclusive gala that very evening. He had rented a sprawling luxury villa on the affluent side of the city to officially pitch his mega development to the corporate investors. He was celebrating his victory, counting his millions before the battle was even legally won. It was the perfect opportunity to hit him where it hurt the most, his ego. I drove past the villa later that night. The long, circular driveway was packed with luxury vehicles. Valets in crisp white shirts were hurriedly parking imported sports cars. Soft jazz music drifted through the warm night air, mingling with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Brent holding court. He was wearing a custom tuxedo, grinning from ear to ear, projecting the image of a titan of industry. Jada was standing right by his side, draped in an expensive designer gown, sipping a cocktail and laughing with a group of wealthy socialites. They were toasting to a future built entirely on my destruction. Brent was currently standing in front of a sleek architectural model of the proposed shopping center, pointing directly to the spot where my historic home currently stood. He was assuring the billionaire investors that the land acquisition was a guaranteed deal, claiming that the final property owner was just an ailing relative who was being gently transitioned into medical care. It was time to give them exactly the kind of show they deserved. I parked my car 2 blocks away and began my physical transformation. I took off my tailored suit jacket and threw it in the trunk. I untucked my dress shirt, buttoning it incorrectly so the collar sat askew. I swapped my polished leather shoes for a pair of old, worn-out house slippers I had brought specifically for this occasion. I messed up my hair, letting it look wild and unkempt. I looked exactly like a lost, severely confused old man who had wandered away from his caretakers in the middle of the night. I bypassed the heavily guarded main entrance, walking around the manicured hedges and slipping quietly through the open catering doors near the kitchen. Nobody stopped me. The staff simply assumed I was a confused elderly neighbor. I shuffled slowly into the main ballroom, letting my shoulders slump and my jaw hang slightly slack. Brent was standing in the center of the room, speaking animatedly to his lead investor, a notoriously ruthless billionaire named Richard Harrington. I walked right up to them, dragging my slippers loudly against the polished marble floor. I stopped inches from Brent, squinting at him as if trying to figure out who he was. "Brent?" I said, my voice loud, wavering, and pitched perfectly to draw the attention of the entire room. "Brent, why are you wearing a penguin suit? Did you steal my lawnmower again? I have been looking everywhere for Valerie. She said she was making meatloaf tonight. Why are all these strangers standing in my living room?" The jazz music seemed to stop. The lively chatter of the room died instantly. Every single pair of eyes in the ballroom snapped toward us. Brent turned around, his smug smile completely vanishing. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. He stood there absolutely paralyzed with profound humiliation. He was trying to sell these men on his immaculate control of the development project, and here was the property owner wandering through his elite gala in slippers. Jada noticed the commotion and rushed over, her face burning bright red with absolute mortification. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging sharply into my skin. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she hissed through clenched teeth, desperately trying to keep her voice down. "How did you even get here?" I pulled my arm away, acting terrified and deeply disoriented. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Where is my wife? I want my wife. Brent, tell these people to get out of my house right now." Richard Harrington stepped back, adjusting his tie, looking at Brent with extreme skepticism and distaste. "Is this the ailing relative you mentioned?" Gallagher Harrington asked, his tone cold and entirely unimpressed. "Because this looks like a highly unstable situation. You told my board the current resident was already secured in a facility and the deed was ready to transfer." Brent was sweating profusely now. His perfectly crafted corporate image was disintegrating in real time. "Yes, Mr. Harrington, I am so sorry," Brent stammered, waving frantically for the private security guards standing near the entrance. "He is suffering from severe dementia. He escaped his home care nurse tonight. We are transitioning him into a secure facility by the end of the week. Please excuse this terrible interruption." 2 large security guards approached me quickly. They grabbed me by the shoulders to escort me out. I put up a weak, trembling struggle, thrashing my arms wildly as if I were having a full-blown panic attack. "Let go of me!" I yelled, playing the part of the panicked senior to absolute perfection. "You are stealing my tools." As I flailed, I purposefully stumbled forward, breaking free from the guards for a fraction of a second. I lunged directly into Richard Harrington, my shoulder colliding heavily with his chest. I grabbed his tailored suit jacket as if bracing myself from a fall, apologizing profusely in a confused, slurred mumble. The guards instantly pulled me back, apologizing to the billionaire as they dragged me backward toward the exit doors. They pushed me out the heavy glass doors and onto the cold pavement of the driveway. Jada followed right behind them, furious and trembling with rage. She pointed a finger at me, her eyes filled with pure hatred. "You are insane," she spat. "You just ruined the most important night of Brent's career. Enjoy your house for the next few days, old man, because after the hearing you are never stepping foot in it again." She turned on her expensive heels and stormed back inside to do damage control. The heavy doors shut, leaving me alone in the cool night air. The moment she was gone, my hunched posture completely straightened out. My trembling hands became perfectly steady. I reached down and calmly buttoned my shirt correctly. A sharp, triumphant smile spread across my face. Jada thought I had just come to cause a foolish, embarrassing scene. She thought I was throwing a desperate, petty tantrum. She had no idea that my brief, clumsy stumble into Richard Harrington was a highly calculated mechanical maneuver. When I grabbed the billionaire's suit jacket to steady myself, my hand had swiftly and silently slipped a small black USB drive directly into his front breast pocket. That flash drive contained the unedited audio files Kendrick had intercepted from Brent's car. It featured crystal-clear recordings of Brent laughing at the investors, specifically calling Harrington a gullible corporate cash cow who was funding a sinking ship. The audio detailed exactly how Brent planned to use their multi-million-dollar investment money not to build a shopping center, but to secretly pay off the violent shadow lenders who were threatening his life. By the time Harrington put his hands in his pockets later tonight, Brent's entire financial empire would burn to the ground. The morning of the guardianship hearing arrived with a suffocating humidity that mirrored the atmosphere inside the county family court. I sat beside Sylvia Rossi at the heavy mahogany defense table. Across the aisle, Brent Gallagher and my daughter Jada sat next to their high-priced attorney, a slick man named Arthur Lawson. Brent looked incredibly smug, leaning back in his chair, with the relaxed posture of a man who believed he had already won. He had no idea that a billionaire was currently reviewing the digital bomb I had dropped in his pocket the night before. Right now, Brent was entirely focused on stealing my house. The judge, a stern-looking man named Honorable Marcus Thorne, called the session to order. Arthur Lawson immediately stood up, adjusting his silk tie, and launched into a meticulously crafted opening statement. He did not yell or act aggressive. Instead, he used a soft, patronizing tone designed to make me look like a tragic, broken victim of old age. Lawson painted a picture of a grieving widower whose mind had completely shattered after the loss of his wife. He told the judge that my cognitive decline was severe, rapid, and incredibly dangerous. He claimed I was highly hostile to the very people trying to care for me. Lawson then dramatically gestured toward Brent and Jada, describing them as deeply exhausted, loving family members who had exhausted every possible option to keep me safe at home. To cap off his opening monologue, Lawson brought up the event from the previous night. He confidently stated that I had escaped my house in a state of severe delusion, wandered miles across the city in nothing but house slippers, and violently disrupted a private corporate gathering. He called it undeniable proof of my profound mental instability. When Lawson finished his character assassination, he called Jada to the witness stand. I watched my own flesh and blood walk up to the podium, raise her right hand, and swear an oath to tell the truth. She sat down, smoothing out her conservative pale blue dress. She had clearly dressed down for the occasion, abandoning her usual flashy designer brands to play the role of the humble, stressed, and heartbroken daughter. Lawson asked her to describe my recent behavior. Jada took a shaky breath, forcing a pair of crocodile tears to well up in her eyes. She performed her role with sickening perfection. She told the judge that she loved me with all her heart, but that the father who raised her was completely gone. She fabricated horrifying stories with absolute ease. She testified that I regularly forgot her name, that I spoke to the walls, and that I had become prone to terrifying fits of unprovoked rage. Then she delivered the ultimate lie. Jada looked directly at the judge and described a completely fictional evening where I had supposedly left the gas stove burning for hours, nearly incinerating the entire house and threatening the entire neighborhood. she cried quietly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue handed to her by the bailiff. She swore under oath that placing me in a locked, high-security assisted living facility was the hardest decision of her entire life, but that it was the only way to protect me from myself. She begged the judge to grant her and her husband immediate and full legal guardianship over my medical decisions and my entire estate. She claimed they needed access to my accounts to fund my long-term medical care. I sat there listening to the little girl I had protected my entire life commit blatant, unapologetic perjury just to steal the ground beneath my feet. Through this entire theatrical performance, I did not react. I did not shake my head, I did not roll my eyes, and I did not shout out in anger. I maintained a posture of terrifying, absolute stillness. My face was a mask of cold, unreadable stone. I kept my hands folded neatly on the table in front of me, breathing slowly and evenly. I was the engineer observing a structural stress test. I was letting them build their entire case on a foundation of gasoline, waiting for the perfect moment to strike the match. Brent kept glancing over at me, clearly unsettled by my unnatural calm. He had expected me to throw a fit to scream that they were lying, which would have perfectly played into their narrative that I was an aggressive, unstable old man. My absolute silence was unnerving him, but unfortunately my silence seemed to be having a different effect on Judge Thorne. The judge watched Jada weep on the stand, his expression softening with genuine sympathy. Family court judges deal with these tragic cases every single day. They are conditioned to believe the heartbreaking testimony of exhausted children struggling to care for declining parents. Judge Thorne flipped through the preliminary medical evaluation provided by Dr. Harrison, the corrupt physician Brent had bribed to diagnose me with severe paranoia and dementia. On paper, their case looked entirely airtight. They had the medical report, they had the tearful testimony of a direct relative, and they had the documented incident of my supposed mental break at the corporate gala the night before. Judge Thorne sighed heavily, closing the manila folder in front of him. He looked down at me from his elevated bench, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and administrative finality. He thanked Jada for her difficult testimony and allowed her to step down from the stand. Jada walked back to the plaintiff table, giving Brent a swift, victorious look before sitting down. The trap was fully set. They had played their cards flawlessly, and they thought the game was over. Judge Thorne folded his hands together and leaned toward the microphone on his desk. This court recognizes the immense emotional toll these situations take on a family, the judge began, his voice echoing through the quiet courtroom. Having reviewed the medical documentation provided by Dr. Harrison and taking into account the sworn testimony of the petitioner, the court is inclined to believe that Mr. Rollins is no longer capable of managing his own personal and financial affairs. Therefore, I am prepared to rule on the petition for emergency guardianship. Brent grinned, a wide, greedy smile spreading across his face. Jada reached out and grabbed his hand, her tears magically drying up in an instant. But before the judge could lift his wooden gavel to strike the block and finalize the order, Sylvia Rossi stood up. The legs of her heavy wooden chair scraped loudly against the courtroom floor, instantly shattering the solemn atmosphere. She did not just stand. She commanded the entire room with a presence that felt like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Judge Thorne frowned, looking irritated by the interruption. Ms. Rossi, I have made my determination. Unless you have a medical expert currently standing in the hallway to directly contradict Dr. Harrison's evaluation, we are finished here. Sylvia did not flinch. She picked up a thick, sealed black envelope from our table and looked directly into the eyes of the judge. Your Honor? Sylvia's voice rang out sharp and lethal as a drawn blade. We do not just have medical experts to contradict that evaluation. We have incontrovertible proof that the testimony given today by the petitioner is completely fabricated. We are not dealing with a civil guardianship dispute today. Your Honor, I have criminal evidence. The heavy silence in the courtroom was suddenly charged with a crackling electric tension. Judge Thorne paused, his hand hovering over his wooden gavel. He stared hard at Sylvia Rossi, his brow furrowed in severe warning. Criminal evidence is a very bold claim for a family court proceeding, counselor, the judge stated, his voice stern and commanding. You had better be absolutely certain about what is in that envelope. Sylvia did not blink. She stepped out from behind our mahogany table and approached the bench with the confident stride of an apex predator closing in on its prey. I am unequivocally certain, Your Honor, Sylvia replied, handing a thick stack of bound documents directly to the court clerk, who passed them up to the judge. She then walked over and dropped an identical stack right in front of Arthur Lawson, who stared at it as if it were a live grenade. What you are looking at are comprehensive independent neurological evaluations conducted over the past 48 hours. These assessments were not performed by a single highly questionable general practitioner. They were administered by 3 separate board-certified neurologists at the State University Research Hospital. They subjected Mr. Rollins to extensive cognitive stress tests, advanced brain imaging, and rigorous psychological profiling. Judge Thorne opened the file and began reading, his eyes scanning the dense medical jargon. Sylvia's voice filled the courtroom, ringing with undeniable authority. As you can clearly read in their concluding summaries, Your Honor, Mr. Rollins does not suffer from dementia, paranoia, or any form of cognitive decline. In fact, all 3 independent specialists noted that his memory recall, executive reasoning, and spatial awareness are functioning at a level exceptionally high for a man of his age. He is sharper than most people in this room. The preliminary evaluation submitted by the petitioners is not just a difference of medical opinion. It is a complete and total fabrication designed to mislead this court. Arthur Lawson jumped to his feet, his face flushed with sudden gripping panic. He realized his entire carefully constructed case was rapidly disintegrating before his eyes. Objection. Your Honor. Lawson shouted, his previously calm and patronizing demeanor entirely shattered. Opposing counsel is casting baseless aspersions on a licensed medical professional. A difference in diagnostic testing does not prove my client's fabricated anything. Dr. Harrison gave his professional, unbiased assessment based on his direct observation. Sylvia turned slowly to face Lawson, a lethal, knowing smile touching the corners of her mouth. Unbiased. Sylvia repeated, letting the word hang in the quiet air like a suspended blade. Your Honor, I direct your attention to Exhibit B in the packet I just provided. Judge Thorne flipped to the next section of the heavy binder. The color instantly drained from Arthur Lawson's face as he looked down at his own copy. Sylvia paced confidently in front of the defense table, her voice projecting clearly to every corner of the room. Through emergency financial subpoenas, we obtained the banking records of Gallagher Developments, the commercial real estate company owned and operated by Mr. Brent Gallagher. On page 4, you will see a wire transfer in the amount of $15,000. This transfer was authorized by Mr. Gallagher at 6 in the morning on the exact same day Dr. Harrison miraculously appeared on my client's doorstep to conduct his so-called medical evaluation. Sylvia paused, letting the devastating reality of the statement sink into the minds of everyone present. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Brent, who was now sweating so profusely his designer shirt collar was soaked through. That $15,000 was wired directly into a blind shell company registered to none other than Dr. Harrison. The petitioners did not seek medical help for an ailing father. They paid a corrupt physician a massive cash bribe to manufacture a fake medical diagnosis so they could legally steal my client property and strip him of his civil rights. The courtroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Arthur Lawson looked at Brent with wide, horrified eyes, stepping physically away from his own client as he realized he had been deliberately used to facilitate a major criminal conspiracy. Judge Thorne slammed his gavel down hard, demanding immediate order. His face was a mask of absolute outrage. The sympathetic judge who had listened to Jada weep just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a furious magistrate who realized his courtroom was being used to execute a felony. Before the judge could speak, Sylvia pressed her advantage, refusing to give Brent and Jada a single second to breathe or formulate a lie. But the blatant medical bribery is only the beginning. Your Honor. The petitioner sat on that stand and wept, claiming my client was aggressive, dangerous, and completely out of touch with reality. I request permission to enter an audio recording into the public record to demonstrate exactly who was threatening whom. Judge Thorne nodded sharply, his eyes locked furiously on Brent and Jada. Proceed, counselor, he commanded. Sylvia connected a small digital device to the courtroom audio system. She pressed a button, and my own voice echoed through the speakers steady and clear, asking what they were doing in my bedroom. Then came Brent's voice, aggressive and dripping with arrogant extortion. The entire courtroom listened in stunned silence as Brent threatened to lock me in Oakwood Pines, demanding I sign my house over to his development firm or be forced into a medical facility. They heard Jada coldly telling me to just accept reality and sign the papers. But Sylvia was not finished destroying them. She tapped the screen again, loading the interior dashcam footage Kendrick had intercepted from Brent's car. The audio shifted to the muffled acoustics of a vehicle interior. Jada's voice rang out bright, cheerful, and saturated with unbelievable, sickening greed. Once we get the judge to sign the guardianship order, we can dump him in Oakwood Pines by the end of the month. The recorded, Jada said cheerfully over the speakers. We sell the house, close the corporate deal, and pay off your little debt. And with the leftover cash, we are booking that month-long luxury yacht cruise through the Mediterranean. The recording clicked off, leaving a deafening, suffocating silence in its wake. The contrast between the weeping, heartbroken daughter on the witness stand and the callous, calculating predator on the audio recording was absolute. Jada sat frozen at the plaintiff table, her face entirely pale, her mouth hanging open in sheer terror. She looked over at me, her eyes begging for a lifeline that no longer existed. I sat perfectly still, my posture rigid, looking back at her with the cold, unyielding gaze of a total stranger. Judge Thorne's face was completely purple with rage. He looked at Brent and Jada as if they were the most repulsive things he had ever seen in his entire life. Arthur Lawson was frantically stuffing his legal pads into his briefcase, desperately trying to physically distance himself from the toxic radioactive fallout of his clients. The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel and gripped it so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I have sat on this bench for 22 years, Judge Thorne bellowed, his voice shaking the wood paneling of the courtroom. I have seen bitter civil disputes and broken families, but I have never witnessed such a vile, premeditated, and deeply cruel attempt to manipulate this court and abuse a vulnerable citizen." He slammed the gavel down with a deafening crack. "This petition for emergency guardianship is dismissed with extreme prejudice." He pointed his wooden gavel directly at Brent and Jada. "Furthermore, I am ordering the court clerk to immediately forward all transcripts, financial records, and audio recordings from today's proceedings directly to the district attorney office. I am requesting an immediate and aggressive criminal investigation into perjury, financial fraud, bribery, and elder abuse. Bailiff, you will detain the petitioners in the holding cell until the police arrive to take their official statements." The heavy, crushing reality of those words crashed down upon the room. Jada completely collapsed, sliding out of her wooden chair and falling to her knees on the courtroom floor. She began to sob hysterically, a guttural, ugly sound of true, inescapable panic. "Dad, please!" she wailed, reaching her trembling hands out toward me across the aisle. "Please do not let them do this. I am sorry." Brent sat entirely paralyzed in his chair, his eyes wide and vacant, as two armed bailiffs marched deliberately toward their table. His expensive tailored suit felt like a prison uniform already. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I sat next to Sylvia, perfectly composed, watching them get exactly what they deserved. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open. Two armed bailiffs escorted Brent and Jada out into the expansive marble corridor of the courthouse. They were instructed to wait by the holding area until the local police detectives arrived to take their formal statements and process their arrests. Jada was still weeping uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands, completely shattered by the reality of her impending criminal charges. But Brent was entirely different. His greed and his absolute terror of the Shadowlenders had completely severed his connection to reality. He was frantically pacing the corridor, desperately tugging at his silk tie, his chest heaving with manic, delusional energy. Standing just a few yards away near the grand staircase was Richard Harrington. The ruthless billionaire investor had attended the hearing to personally oversee the finalization of the land acquisition. He was flanked by 3 other wealthy corporate board members, all of them wearing immaculate tailored suits and checking their luxury watches. When Brent saw his investor standing there, a jolt of desperate adrenaline surged through his veins. He violently yanked his arm away from the bailiff, ignoring the stern warning to stay put, and marched directly toward me as Sylvia and I exited the courtroom. Brent pointed a shaking finger at my face, his voice echoing loudly off the marble walls, desperately trying to project dominance in front of his wealthy backers. "You think you won?" Old man Brent snarled, spit flying from his lips. "You think one sympathetic judge changes anything? I am a developer. I have the entire city council in my pocket. I will call the mayor tomorrow and have your pathetic rundown house condemned through eminent domain. I will have the city bulldoze your property for public use, and I will buy the dirt from the government for pennies. You are going to die homeless in the streets. I will make sure of it." I did not back away. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at Brent with the cold, sterile observation of an engineer inspecting a completely broken machine. I stepped past him, completely ignoring his frantic threats, and walked directly toward Richard Harrington and the corporate board members. Harrington looked at me with a mixture of confusion and intense scrutiny. He recognized my face instantly. I was the wild, unkempt old man in house slippers who had violently disrupted his elite gala the night before. But today, standing before him in a sharp charcoal suit, my posture perfectly rigid, and my eyes radiating sharp intelligence, I looked like an entirely different human being. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice smooth, resonant, and projecting absolute authority. "Allow me to formally introduce myself. My name is Dexter Rollins. I am a retired mechanical engineer, and I am the sole owner of the residential property you are currently attempting to purchase. I apologize for my unorthodox attire at your gathering last night, but I needed to personally deliver a message without raising the suspicions of my very greedy son-in-law." Brent rushed over, stepping between Harrington and me, waving his hands frantically. "Mr. Harrington, do not listen to a single word this man says," Brent pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "The judge was biased. The medical reports were flawed. This is just a temporary legal setback. I promise you I will have the city seize the land by the end of the month. The shopping center project is completely secure. You have my word." Richard Harrington did not even look at Brent. His cold, piercing eyes remained locked firmly on me. He possessed the quiet, terrifying patience of a man who had built an empire by identifying liars and completely destroying them. He gestured for me to continue, entirely ignoring Brent's frantic, sweating presence. "Your project is not secure, Mr. Harrington," I stated clearly, making sure every investor in the corridor could hear my words. "In fact, your project is legally impossible to build. Brent Gallagher sold you an elaborate fantasy because he is fundamentally arrogant, and he failed to conduct the most basic level of corporate due diligence." Sylvia Rossi stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She unlatched her heavy leather briefcase and pulled out 4 identical, sleek black folders. She handed one directly to Richard Harrington and distributed the rest to his board members. I watched Brent's face contort in absolute horror as Harrington opened the folder and began reading the highlighted legal documents inside. As you can see in the verified state registry filings, I explained, my voice echoing through the quiet corridor. My late wife, Valerie Rollins, was not just a grieving mother. She was a brilliant corporate accountant. 14 months ago, she established a highly secured shell company called Apex Heritage Holdings. Recognizing that developers like you were attempting to aggressively gentrify and bulldoze our historic neighborhood, she took proactive measures. 6 months ago, she used her entire family inheritance to quietly approach the City Planning Commission. She did not just secure our residential deed. She legally purchased the exclusive commercial zoning rights for the entire 4-block radius. Harrington's eyes widened marginally as he read the heavily stamped, notarized deed of commercial rights. Brent Gallagher assumed that forcing me out of my home would give him the freedom to pave over my land and build your luxury shopping center. I continued, my tone dropping to a lethal, unyielding pitch. But a residential eviction does not change commercial zoning laws. Without my explicit notarized signature as the sole surviving managing director of Apex Heritage Holdings, it is a federal crime to construct a single commercial structure on that land. Your multi-million-dollar development project is completely worthless. Brent sold you a contract for land he is legally prohibited from developing. Brent's face turned the color of wet ash. He opened his mouth to formulate a lie to spin some miraculous legal loophole, but his voice completely failed him. He stood there trembling violently, watching his entire corporate empire instantly vaporize into thin air. Richard Harrington slowly closed the black folder. His expression was a mask of terrifying, absolute fury. He did not look at the zoning documents anymore. Instead, he reached his hand deep into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a small black USB drive. My private security team decrypted and reviewed the audio files on this flash drive at 6 o'clock this morning, Harrington said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous growl. "I heard every single word you said in your car, Gallagher. I heard you call me a gullible cash cow, and more importantly, I heard your detailed, frantic plan to take my corporate investment funds and secretly wire them to an underground syndicate of shadow lenders to pay off your $4 million gambling debt." Brent let out a small, pathetic whimper. His knees began to visibly shake. "You are a thief," Harrington stated coldly, slipping the USB drive back into his pocket. "We are formally withdrawing all capital funding effective immediately. My legal department will file a massive civil lawsuit for criminal fraud against your firm by the end of the business day. We are going to liquidate every single asset you possess." Harrington turned his back on Brent and walked briskly down the marble corridor, his board members following closely behind him. They did not look back. The reality of his situation finally crushed Brent with the weight of a collapsing building. The investors were gone. The land was legally untouchable. The $4 million debt to the violent shadow lenders was now due immediately, and he had absolutely no way to pay it. Brent's legs completely gave out beneath him. He collapsed onto the cold marble floor of the courthouse, landing hard on his knees. He grabbed his hair, letting out a loud, agonizing scream of pure terror as the two armed bailiffs finally walked over to place the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. Brent Gallagher and my daughter Jada did not spend that entire night in a jail cell. Because the massive federal fraud and perjury charges required a formal grand jury indictment, they were granted an emergency bail hearing late in the afternoon. Jada had to liquidate the absolute last of her personal savings and pawn her designer wedding ring just to secure the exorbitant bond required to walk out of that courthouse. They returned to their leased luxury villa completely drained, disgraced, and entirely exposed. But the legal nightmare was only the beginning of Brent collapse. By 8 o'clock that evening, Richard Harrington corporate attorneys had executed a flawless financial massacre. They filed emergency injunctions that immediately froze every single bank account tied to Gallagher Developments. When the local banks saw the incoming civil lawsuits and the pending criminal investigations, they proactively locked down Brent's personal checking and savings accounts. He was completely locked out of his own life. Then the burner phone in his pocket began to ring. Kendrick had re-established the audio feed from a secondary listening device he had slipped into Jada's purse during the courtroom chaos. Sitting in my quiet study, I listened as Brent answered the phone with a trembling, breathless voice. It was the shadow lenders. They had eyes everywhere, and word on the street travels faster than any legal document. They knew the corporate development deal was entirely dead. The gruff, terrifying voice on the other end of the line did not yell. He simply told Brent that his $4 million debt was no longer negotiable. The grace period was officially canceled. The man told Brent that if the money was not delivered by midnight tomorrow, they were going to come to his house and start taking his payment in flesh and bone. The call disconnected, leaving Brent hyperventilating in the center of his sprawling, useless mansion. The sheer, absolute terror of his impending execution completely shattered whatever remained of Brent's sanity. He began pacing the hardwood floors of his villa like a rabid, cornered animal. He swept a row of expensive crystal decanters off the home bar, shattering them violently against the walls. Jada, who was sitting on the living room sofa crying over her ruined reputation, jumped up and begged him to calm down. That was her fatal mistake. She drew his attention. Brent turned his manic, bloodshot eyes toward my daughter. The charming, sophisticated real estate mogul she had betrayed her own family to marry was entirely gone. In his place stood a violent, desperate coward looking for a scapegoat. He lunged across the room and grabbed Jada roughly by the shoulders, shaking her with terrifying force. He screamed right into her face, his voice echoing through the hidden microphone directly into my headphones. He blamed her for absolutely everything. He screamed that if she had not been so pathetically weak, they would have secured the deed to my house months ago. He yelled that if she had just forced me into a nursing home the moment Valerie was diagnosed with cancer, the corporate deal would have closed before the shadow lenders ever issued their deadline. "You ruined my life," he roared, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated rage. "You could not even manipulate one senile old man. You are completely useless." Jada cried out, pushing against his chest, telling him he was hurting her. But Brent did not let go. His financial panic had morphed into physical violence. I listened with a cold, hardened expression as the scuffle intensified. The sound of furniture overturning and glass crunching underfoot painted a vivid, horrifying picture. Brent slapped her hard across the face, the sharp crack ringing through the audio feed. He shoved her violently backward. I heard Jada scream in pain as she crashed to the floor. The man she had chosen over her own parents was now treating her like human garbage. She realized in that terrifying moment that she had traded a father who would have died for her for a monster who was perfectly willing to kill her to save himself. I sat at my desk in the dark, the glow of my computer monitors illuminating the stony expression on my face. A father from 10 years ago would have already been sprinting to his truck, grabbing a baseball bat to defend his little girl. But I was not that man anymore. The fire in my heart had burned out completely, leaving nothing but cold, calculating logic. I listened as Jada scrambled across the floor, crawling away from Brent. A heavy wooden door slammed shut, followed instantly by the sharp click of a lock. She had barricaded herself inside one of the guest bathrooms. Brent immediately began pounding his fists against the door, screaming that she could not hide from him, threatening to tear the door right off its hinges. My personal cell phone lit up on the desk next to my keyboard. It was Jada. I stared at the screen for 3 full rings, letting the tension build before I calmly reached out and answered the call. "Dad," she sobbed hysterically, her voice reduced to a frantic, breathless whisper. "Dad, please, you have to help me. Brent has gone completely crazy. He is hurting me. He says the mob is coming to kill him and he is blaming me for the money. Please, Dad, I know I was wrong. I know I did terrible things, but you have to come save me." I listened to the heavy, violent thuds of Brent kicking the bathroom door in the background. Her terror was absolute and entirely genuine. She was begging me to use the secret wealth Valerie had left behind to pay off the shadow lenders to rescue her from the nightmare she had actively helped create. She thought the unconditional love of a father could be summoned on command, even after she had tried to strip away my freedom and lock me in a cage. "Jada," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any parental warmth. "You made your bed. You chose to align yourself with a thief and a predator. You plotted to steal the very home I built with my bare hands. And now you are upset because the snake you brought into the house decided to bite you." "Dad, please, the door is cracking," she shrieked, sheer panic tearing through her vocal cords. "He is going to kill me. I am your daughter." I took a slow, deliberate breath. "I am coming," I stated firmly. I hung up the phone before she could say another word, but I did not grab my checkbook. I did not rush to my car to play the hero. I picked up the phone again and dialed the direct personal number of the local police precinct captain, a man who had already been thoroughly briefed on the criminal fraud investigation by my attorney. I told him exactly what was happening, gave him the address of the villa, and told him to send every available unit. I arrived at the luxury villa exactly 15 minutes later. The sprawling manicured front lawn was illuminated by the harsh strobing glare of red and blue emergency lights. 4 police cruisers had already swarmed the driveway. I stepped out of my truck, my posture rigid, the cold night air biting at my face. I walked up the stone pathway just as the heavy front doors of the villa were kicked open by 2 heavily armored tactical officers. Brent had managed to break through the bathroom door. He was actively dragging a sobbing, bruised Jada by her arm down the main hallway when the police breached the entrance. The officers drew their weapons, shouting deafening commands for Brent to drop to his knees. The sheer, overwhelming force of the police presence finally shattered his violent rage. Brent froze, his eyes wide with absolute terror, and slowly lowered himself to the hardwood floor. Officers swarmed him instantly. They slammed him face down onto the broken glass, pulling his arms behind his back and securing him with heavy steel handcuffs. They read him his rights, charging him not only with felony domestic battery, but with the outstanding federal warrants for bank fraud and corporate extortion. Jada scrambled away from him, clutching her bruised shoulder. She looked up through her tear-soaked hair and saw me standing in the open doorway, flanked by police officers. A look of profound relief washed over her face. She thought I had come to bring her home. She reached her hand out toward me, crying my name, but I did not step forward. I just stood there, my eyes locked on hers, completely cold, unyielding, and totally dead to her existence. Jada stumbled forward, her designer dress torn, and her face stained with mascara and tears. She threw her arms toward me, expecting the warm, protective embrace of the father she had known her entire life. She collided with my chest, sobbing uncontrollably, burying her bruised face into my coat. I did not wrap my arms around her. I stood completely rigid, my hands resting strictly at my sides. Jada pulled back slightly, her eyes wide and desperate, misinterpreting my physical stiffness as shock. "Oh, Dad, thank God you came," she cried, her voice trembling with absolute relief. "I knew you would not let him hurt me. I knew you would save me. We need to leave right now. I can pack a bag. I will come back to the house with you. I can stay in my old bedroom until the divorce is finalized. You can protect me from him." She was speaking frantically, wiping the blood from her lip, entirely convinced that my presence was an act of parental salvation. She truly believed that a few tears and a bruised shoulder would magically erase the fact that she had sat in a courtroom just hours ago and committed perjury to lock me in a psychiatric ward. I looked down at her with a gaze so devoid of emotion it caused her frantic rambling to stutter to a halt. "I did not come here to pack your bags, Jada," I stated, my voice echoing with a hollow metallic chill. "I came here to ensure the police apprehended a violent felon. The officers will transport you to the downtown precinct now. You need to give a formal statement regarding the domestic battery and your extensive knowledge of his financial fraud." I turned and walked back to my truck, leaving her standing on the broken glass of her ruined mansion, staring after me in total confusion. An hour later, the harsh fluorescent lights of the downtown police precinct illuminated a scene of absolute misery. Jada sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, a cheap gray emergency blanket wrapped around her trembling shoulders. I stood near the precinct exit with Kendrick silently observing the bureaucratic machinery processing Brent Gallagher's total downfall. Just as a detective was walking over to hand Jada her preliminary victim statement, the heavy glass doors of the precinct swung open. A tall, striking white woman walked into the lobby. She was dressed in an immaculate, sharp-tailored suit, her posture radiating predatory confidence. I recognized her instantly from the telephoto surveillance pictures Kendrick had sent me days ago. It was Meredith, the ruthless commercial real estate broker and Brent's secret mistress. She was not alone. She was flanked by two high-powered corporate defense attorneys carrying thick leather briefcases. Jada looked up from her statement, her swollen eyes narrowing in confusion. She recognized Meredith from various corporate dinners, believing her to be nothing more than Brent's vital business colleague. Jada weakly stood up, letting the gray blanket slip from her shoulders. "Meredith, what are you doing here?" Jada asked, her voice cracking. "Are you here to bail him out? You cannot help him. He has gone completely insane." Meredith stopped in the center of the precinct lobby and looked at Jada. There was no sympathy in her eyes. There was only the cold, calculating look of a woman who had just successfully executed a flawless financial extraction. "I am not here to bail Brent out of anything," Jada Meredith replied, her voice crisp and entirely devoid of warmth. "I am here to formally surrender financial documents to the federal investigators to secure my own total legal immunity." One of Meredith's attorneys placed a thick stack of certified bank transfers and corporate deeds on the precinct intake desk. Jada stared at the documents, her confusion rapidly mutating into panic. "What documents?" Jada demanded, stepping closer. Meredith turned to face my daughter, fully a cruel, mocking smile touching the corners of her mouth. Over the last 48 hours, as Brent realized his corporate funding was vanishing and the shadow lenders were closing in, he completely panicked. He liquidated every single joint asset the two of you possessed. Your shared savings accounts, the equity in your leased vehicles, the offshore emergency funds. He drained all of it. And to hide that capital from the federal government and the mob, he transferred every single penny into an impenetrable holding company registered exclusively in my name. Jada's face turned the color of wet chalk. She physically staggered backward, shaking her head in violent denial. "No, he would not do that. We are married. We are partners. He told me we were going to survive this together." Meredith let out a short, piercing laugh that echoed off the precinct walls. "You were never his partner, Jada. You were a convenient, highly gullible tool. Brent never loved you. He despised your background, and he laughed at your expensive tastes behind your back. He only married you because you were the easiest, weakest point of access to your father's historic property. You were nothing but a disposable key to unlock a multi-million-dollar real estate deal. And the moment that deal died, so did his use for you. You are completely bankrupt." The words struck Jada like physical blows. Her hands shook violently as she pulled her smartphone from her pocket. She frantically opened her banking applications, her eyes darting across the glowing screens. The digital reality confirmed her absolute destruction. Her checking accounts showed zero balances. Her joint savings were heavily overdrawn. Her credit lines were completely frozen. The luxurious high society life she had betrayed her own mother and father to secure was a total illusion. She had sold her soul for a man who viewed her heritage as dirt and viewed her as a pathetic stepping stone. Now the stepping stone was broken, the land was untouchable, and the man had handed the last scraps of their wealth to his actual partner. Jada was entirely destitute, drowning in the impending legal fees for the perjury and fraud she had so willingly participated in. She had absolutely nothing left. The sheer suffocating magnitude of her ruin finally caused Jada's knees to buckle. She collapsed onto the dirty tile floor of the police precinct, her chest heaving with violent, agonizing sobs. The reality of her betrayal had come full circle, crushing her under its massive weight. She looked around the sterile lobby, her desperate, tear-soaked eyes searching for a single lifeline. They landed on me. I was standing perfectly still near the exit, my posture rigid, my expression carved from solid granite. Jada scrambled across the cold floor on her hands and knees. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my wool coat, her fingers digging into the fabric like a drowning sailor clutching a life raft. "Dad, please!" she wailed, her voice a guttural, pathetic screech that drew the attention of every officer in the room. "I have nothing. He took everything. I am so sorry. I was blind. I was stupid. Please let me come home. You have to help me. I am your daughter. I beg you." I did not reach down to help her up. I did not offer a word of comfort. I slowly and deliberately pulled the fabric of my coat out of her desperate, trembling grip. I took a single step back, severing the physical connection. I looked down at the weeping, broken woman kneeling on the precinct floor. I did not look at her with anger or hatred or even disappointment. I looked at her with the absolute terrifying apathy of a man staring at a complete stranger. I turned and walked out of the police precinct, leaving Jada sobbing on the cold tile floor. I got into my truck with Kendrick, the silence between us heavy but completely necessary. We drove back to my historic neighborhood, the streets quiet and undisturbed under the night sky. I stepped out of the vehicle, thanked Kendrick for his flawless work, and walked up the pathway to my house. I unlocked the heavy deadbolts and stepped onto the wraparound porch, but I did not go inside. I simply stood there under the amber glow of the porch light, waiting. I knew she would come. Desperate people always return to the last place they remember feeling safe. Less than an hour later, a cheap local cab pulled into my driveway. Jada stepped out, shivering in the cool night air. The police had likely released her pending grand jury proceedings, and without a dime to her name, she had nowhere else to go. She walked up the driveway, her ruined designer dress clinging to her battered frame. She looked up at me, standing on the porch, and a weak, pathetic smile of relief crossed her face. She truly believed that my presence at the precinct meant my anger had subsided. She thought the natural instinct of a father would override the absolute betrayal she had committed. She climbed the wooden steps, reaching out to grab the brass handle of the front door. I stepped forward, perfectly aligning my body to block her path. My stance was as solid and unyielding as a brick wall. Jada stopped, confusion washing over her bruised face. "Dad," she whispered, her voice fragile and shaking. "Please let me inside. I am so cold. I am so tired. I just want to go to my room and sleep." I looked down at her, my expression completely void of warmth. "You do not have a room here anymore, Jada," I stated, my voice cutting through the quiet night like a steel blade. "You lost the right to cross this threshold the moment you decided to put a price tag on it." Jada stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. "But this is my home," she stammered, her voice cracking. "This is where I grew up. You are my father." I shook my head slowly, feeling the immense weight of our ancestors standing right behind me. A home is a sacred place built on loyalty and respect. I said my words deliberate and heavy. This house is not just a building made of wood and brick. This house is a monument to the survival of our family. My parents and your mother parents were legally forbidden from buying property in the affluent parts of this city. They worked manual labor jobs until their backs gave out just to secure a small piece of this earth for us. Your mother and I sacrificed every luxury to maintain it. We preserved this land so you would have a foundation, a heritage to stand on in a world that constantly tries to push us down. And what did you do with that legacy? I took a step closer, my voice rising with a cold, terrifying authority. You handed it over to a greedy, racist parasite who looked at our history and saw nothing but a demolition site. You conspired with a man who called your own people obsolete relics. You sat in a car sipping sparkling water and cheerfully plotted to lock your grieving father in a psychiatric ward just so you could take Mediterranean yacht cruises with blood money. You did not just betray me, Jada. You betrayed your mother on her deathbed. You sold out the blood, sweat, and tears of every black family on this street to a man who discarded you the exact second he drained your bank accounts. You traded your birthright for designer shoes and a fake upper-class life. And now you have the absolute audacity to stand on the very porch you tried to bulldoze and demand sanctuary. There is no sanctuary here for a traitor. Jada began to weep again, loud, agonizing sobs that echoed into the empty street. Dad, I am sorry, she wailed, clutching her arms around her chest. I was manipulated. Brent brainwashed me. I did not know how bad it was. I have absolutely nothing left. The banks froze everything. I cannot even afford a lawyer for the perjury charges. You have to help me. I reached behind the front door and pulled out a heavy scuffed canvas suitcase. I had packed it earlier that afternoon. It contained the cheap sweaters, old jeans, and basic toiletries she had left in her childhood closet over a decade ago. I shoved the suitcase forward. It hit the wooden floorboards of the porch with a dull thud and slid directly into her shins. Jada looked down at the old luggage, her face contorting in pure disbelief. Here is everything you left behind when you decided you were too good for this house, I said coldly. That is the absolute limit of my generosity. I am not paying for your high-priced defense attorneys. I am not bailing you out of the federal charges you willingly incurred. I am not giving you a single dime from the wealth your mother meticulously protected from scavengers like you. You wanted to play in the deep end with corporate sharks and shadow lenders. Now you get to face the legal consequences of those choices entirely on your own. Jada dropped to her knees on the wooden porch, her hands desperately gripping the fabric of my trousers. You cannot do this, she screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, terrifying pitch. You are punishing me. I am your only child. You have millions of dollars. You can fix this. You can make it all go away. Please, Dad, I am begging you. I looked down at the woman clawing at my legs. There was no pity left in my soul. I reached down, grabbed her wrists with a firm, unbreakable grip, and physically peeled her hands off my clothing. I am not punishing you, Jada, I stated, stepping back into the doorway. I am simply letting you experience the reality you worked so hard to create. You wanted independence from this family. You wanted to pave over your roots. Congratulations, you are completely untethered. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the dark sky, and the first heavy drops of a cold, impending storm began to fall. The rain hit the wooden porch, spotting Jada's ruined dress and washing the remaining makeup down her bruised cheeks. She knelt there beside the cheap canvas suitcase, staring up at me with a look of total, unadulterated devastation. She finally realized that my love was not a bottomless well she could exploit. The safety net was permanently gone. I stepped completely inside the house and placed my hand on the edge of the heavy oak door. Dad, wait, she screamed, scrambling forward, reaching out toward the light spilling from the hallway. Do not shut me out, please. I pushed the door forward. The heavy steel deadbolts clacked into place with a definitive ringing finality. I stood in the warm, quiet foyer, listening to the muffled sounds of the storm outside. Jada began to pound her fists against the thick wood, her screams completely swallowed by the pouring rain. She wailed my name over and over again, the agonizing cries of a woman who had gambled her entire soul and lost absolutely everything. I did not look back. I turned off the porch light, plunging her into total darkness, and walked down the hallway, leaving her outside to face the cold, brutal storm of her own making. The morning after I locked my daughter out in the storm, the federal government officially took the reins of Brent Gallagher's destruction. The local police department had processed the initial domestic battery and forgery charges. But once Richard Harrington's corporate attorneys handed over the financial records and the decrypted audio files, the case immediately escalated to a much higher authority. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not move with the slow, bureaucratic crawl of local precincts. They move with devastating surgical precision. Dozens of heavily armed federal agents swarmed the sleek downtown offices of Gallagher Developments. They shattered the pristine glass doors, seized every single computer server, and boxed up years of fraudulent physical ledgers. The evidence against Brent was staggering and completely undeniable. The FBI uncovered a massive, intricate web of wire fraud, illegal diversion of corporate investments, and forged signatures spanning across multiple state lines. They traced the exact digital routes he used to funnel legitimate investor capital directly into the pockets of the violent shadow lenders. The audio recording I had slipped into the billionaire's pocket served as the absolute nail in his coffin. It laid out Brent's entire criminal intent in his own arrogant voice. He was officially charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and severe elder abuse. The federal prosecutor made it abundantly clear during the arraignment that Brent was looking at a mandatory minimum of 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Brent was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of power, control, and wealth. But sitting in a cold concrete federal interrogation room without his tailored suits or his expensive watch, that illusion completely evaporated. He was nothing but a terrified coward. When the federal prosecutors laid the staggering weight of a 15-year sentence on the metal table in front of him, Brent broke instantly. He did not possess a single ounce of loyalty, honor, or genuine love for anyone but himself. Desperate to shave even a few years off his impending sentence and begging to be placed in protective custody to hide from the shadow lenders, he immediately offered the federal agents a plea deal. And the currency he used to buy that deal was his own wife. Brent looked the federal agents dead in the eye and swore that Jada was not an innocent bystander, but a willing, active co-conspirator. He provided them with detailed accounts of her direct involvement in the plot to legally kidnap me. He told the federal investigators that Jada had personally coordinated with the corrupt physician Dr. Harrison to falsify my medical records. He testified that she had been the one pushing to aggressively accelerate the guardianship timeline so they could liquidate my property before his debts came due. Brent threw Jada completely under the bus, trading her freedom to slightly soften his own landing. Because of his sworn statements, the district attorney officially elevated Jada's charges. She was no longer just looking at a simple misdemeanor for perjury in family court. She was formally indicted by a federal grand jury for conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to elder abuse. The reality of her federal indictment crashed down on Jada with crushing, inescapable gravity. She was entirely cut off from the wealth she had so arrogantly tried to steal. Meredith had successfully funneled all of Brent's hidden capital into her own secure offshore accounts and vanished without a trace, leaving Jada with absolutely nothing but massive legal liabilities. To avoid sitting in a county jail cell awaiting her trial, Jada had to hire a defense attorney. But high-powered corporate lawyers require massive retainers, and her bank accounts were frozen solid by the government. She was forced to experience the exact financial desperation she had so eagerly tried to inflict upon me. Jada had to meticulously dismantle her own glamorous life just to survive. I received reports from Kendrick detailing her humiliating rapid descent. She was forced to sell every single designer handbag, every pair of imported shoes, and every piece of expensive jewelry she owned to an aggressive pawnbroker for absolute pennies on the dollar. Her wealthy high society friends, the women she used to sip champagne with at exclusive charity galas, instantly treated her like a contagious disease. Nobody returned her calls. Nobody offered her a spare bedroom. Nobody wanted to be associated with a woman indicted for attempting to institutionalize her own grieving father. With her luxury villa repossessed and her social circle entirely gone, Jada was forced to rent a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment in the very worst part of the city. But the money from her liquidated wardrobe was barely enough to cover her attorney's initial retainer. To pay her monthly rent and afford her basic groceries, the woman who had plotted to steal $1 million historic property had to swallow her pride and beg for a minimum wage job. She was hired as a waitress at a greasy, rundown 24-hour diner operating on the graveyard shift. Kendrick sent me a photograph of her wiping down a sticky laminate table at 3 in the morning. She was wearing a cheap, stained polyester uniform, her hair tied back in a messy bun, looking completely exhausted and thoroughly defeated. The delicate hands that had casually rummaged through her dying mother's jewelry box were now scrubbing dirty coffee mugs and picking up crumpled dollar bills left as tips by rude customers. The high society life she had traded her soul for was gone forever. She was learning the value of hard labor in the most punishing way possible. She spent her nights serving food to strangers, her feet aching and her spirit completely broken, knowing with absolute certainty that she had thrown away a loving father and a comfortable inheritance for a man who had discarded her to save himself. 6 months after the federal raid, the sprawling legal battle finally culminated in a towering federal courthouse downtown. It was the day of Brent Gallagher's official sentencing hearing. I walked into the gallery wearing a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, my posture radiating the absolute calm of a man who had successfully weathered a brutal hurricane and emerged completely victorious. I sat in the second row, perfectly positioned to have a clear view of the defense table. The heavy wooden doors at the front of the courtroom swung open with a loud creak, and the armed federal bailiffs escorted the prisoners into the room. I looked toward the aisle as Brent was led in. He was completely unrecognizable. The arrogant, slick real estate mogul who had strutted through my house barking orders was entirely gone. He was wearing an oversized bright orange prison jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles bound tightly by heavy steel shackles. The chains clinked loudly against the polished floor with every slow, defeated shuffle of his feet. He looked incredibly pale, gaunt, and completely broken by the reality of his impending incarceration. His hair was thinning and his shoulders slumped forward under the invisible weight of his total ruin. As he slowly took his seat at the defense table, he nervously scanned the gallery, dreading the faces of the people he had destroyed. His panicked, hollow eyes scanned the wooden benches and eventually locked directly onto mine. I did not glare at him with anger. I did not look away. I simply sat there perfectly composed and offered him a slow, chillingly cold smile. After the judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel and formally sentenced Brent Gallagher to 15 years in federal prison, the courtroom slowly emptied. I walked out of those heavy oak doors and felt the crisp, clean air of the city hit my face. The exhausting legal war was officially over, but there was one final, deeply personal piece of business remaining. I met Sylvia Rossi later that same afternoon at her downtown office. The late sunlight filtered through the large glass windows, casting a warm, golden glow across the room. Sylvia did not have any more legal briefs, financial subpoenas, or court summons to hand me. Instead, she opened her top desk drawer and pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. It was Valerie's personal journal. I recognized the embossed cover immediately. She used to sit by the living room window with a cup of chamomile tea, writing in it for hours while I read the evening paper. Sylvia slid the notebook across the glass desk, her sharp professional demeanor softening into a rare, genuine expression of deep respect. "Your wife wanted me to hold on to this until the absolute end," Sylvia said softly. "She instructed me to give it to you only after Brent was locked away and the property was entirely secure." My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the leather-bound book. I opened the cover and there was her familiar, elegant handwriting. Just seeing the curvature of her ink on the page brought a profound ache to my chest, but it was accompanied by an immense swelling sense of pride. I began to read the final pages she had written during the last months of her life. Valerie had not spent her final year simply resting or succumbing to her illness. The journal revealed that she had applied the meticulous, calculating mindset of a senior corporate accountant to completely dismantle Brent Gallagher's entire existence. She detailed exactly how she first grew suspicious of him. She noticed the subtle discrepancies in his stories, the aggressive way he inquired about our retirement funds, and the distinct scent of desperation he carried whenever he visited our home. When she received her terminal cancer diagnosis, she realized her illness would serve as the ultimate camouflage. Brent viewed her sickness as a countdown to a massive payday. He thought her physical frailty meant she was mentally incapacitated and entirely oblivious. Valerie completely leaned into that false assumption. She documented how she would purposely pretend to be asleep when Brent and Jada came over, allowing them to speak freely in the hallway outside our bedroom. She listened as Brent discussed his shadow loans, and she used those intercepted details to trace his underground debts. While she was taking grueling chemotherapy treatments, she was secretly coordinating with Sylvia Rossi on encrypted phone lines. She used the physical exhaustion of her illness as an excuse to stay in her room, giving her the absolute isolation she needed to quietly funnel her uncle's inheritance into Apex Heritage Holdings. She mapped out the corporate developer's entire gentrification blueprint and bought the commercial zoning rights right out from under them. She knew Brent would eventually try to declare me incompetent to steal the residential deed. She built a legal fortress around my assets that was completely invisible to his arrogant, superficial investigations. Valerie had engineered a trap with such devastating precision that Brent practically tied the noose around his own neck and eagerly kicked away the chair. I sat in Sylvia's office reading Valerie's final entry. "My dear Dexter," the ink read her words, speaking directly to my soul from the page. "I know you will be devastated when I leave this world. I know your heart will be broken, and I know your profound grief will make you vulnerable to the vultures circling our home. You have always been a protector, a builder, a man who fixes broken things. But I realized that I could not leave you alone to fix the brokenness of our daughter. Jada chose a path of greed, and she willingly brought a wolf into our sanctuary. I could not fight this battle by your side, so I built you a weapon instead. I love you more than life itself, and my love does not end simply because my physical body failed me. I will protect you from the other side. Do not shed tears for me, my love. Use the tools I left you, secure our home, and find your peace." The tears I had held back for so many months finally fell. They were not tears of sorrow, but tears of absolute awe and overpowering gratitude. Valerie had stared death straight in the face and decided her last act on earth would be to shield me from total ruin. Her love was a tangible, indomitable force that transcended mortality itself. She had reached across the veil between life and death to strike down the man who tried to destroy me, neutralizing the daughter who betrayed us. I held the journal to my chest, feeling the warmth of her memory enveloping me like a heavy protective blanket. The woman I had loved for 4 decades was an absolute warrior. She had fought her illness with grace, and she had fought our enemies with an intellectual brutality that left their lives entirely in ashes. I looked up at Sylvia, wiping the tears from my weathered face. I had my closure. I had my justice. Valerie had made sure I was safe, and her final mission was a complete, undeniable success. Sylvia offered a gentle, knowing smile as she gathered her files. Your wife made sure you walked away with everything, Dexter. The residential deed is entirely secure. The commercial zoning rights are fully vested in Apex Heritage Holdings under your exclusive control. You are sitting on a literal gold mine. You could sell those zoning rights back to Richard Harrington or any other corporate developer for an astronomical sum and spend the rest of your days traveling the world in luxury. You have absolute power over the fate of that entire neighborhood. I looked down at the heavy black binder containing the corporate deeds. I thought about the historic brick homes on my street. I thought about my neighbors, the aging widows and retired factory workers who were constantly harassed by greedy developers trying to erase our history and force us out of the only homes we had ever known. I thought about the legacy Valerie and I had worked our entire lives to preserve. I slowly closed the leather journal and placed it securely in my coat pocket. I looked at Sylvia, my posture straightening with a renewed vital sense of purpose. I am not going to sell those rights to the developers, Sylvia. And I am not going to keep this power just to enrich myself. Valerie gave me this sword to protect our home, and now I am going to use it to protect everyone else. I need you to draw up a completely new set of legal contracts. I have a much grander plan for Apex Heritage Holdings, and it is going to permanently change the landscape of this city. I sat down with Sylvia Rossi over the next several weeks to completely restructure the foundation my late wife had built. We took Apex Heritage Holdings, the secret Delaware shell company Valerie had so brilliantly created, and entirely dissolved its corporate profit structure. With Sylvia's unmatched legal expertise, I converted the limited liability company into an irrevocable community land trust. I transferred every single commercial zoning right, every localized air right, and every square inch of the protective buffer zones directly into the trust. I did not want to be a solo kingmaker holding the keys to the kingdom, nor did I want to leave the neighborhood vulnerable to whoever might inherit my estate after I was gone. A community land trust meant the power no longer rested in the hands of a single individual who could be bought, threatened, or manipulated. The legal framework mandated that the zoning rights were to be permanently managed by a board of local residents, ensuring that any future development had to directly benefit the community, not exploit it. We established strict, unbreakable bylaws. There would be no luxury high-rises. There would be no predatory commercial buyouts. There would be no bulldozing historic residential plots for artisan coffee shops or boutique retail centers. The land was officially and permanently locked down. I signed the final transfer documents in Sylvia's downtown office, pressing my pen firmly onto the thick paper. I felt the profound weight of my ancestors guiding my hand as the ink dried. Valerie had secured the massive steel shield, and I had just bolted it directly into the bedrock. The immediate fallout in the corporate real estate sector was absolutely seismic. The moment the legal filings went public, the aggressive developers who had been swarming our streets like vultures were completely paralyzed. Richard Harrington and his billionaire board members realized that the massive shopping plaza they had already spent millions designing was officially dead in the water. They could not build a single commercial structure. They could not rezone the existing residential lots. Their high-priced corporate lawyers tried to look for loopholes, but Sylvia had engineered a legal fortress so incredibly dense that they eventually had to cut their staggering losses and completely abandon the project. The predatory phone calls to the elderly widows on my street stopped overnight. The glossy, aggressive cash offer flyers disappeared from our mailboxes. The looming, terrifying shadow of gentrification that had threatened to erase our historic African-American neighborhood was permanently banished. Our streets were no longer a target for corporate demolition. The generational wealth, the culture, and the deeply rooted history of our community were finally safe. We did not have to worry about waking up one morning to find eviction notices or skyrocketing property taxes driven by luxury developments. The families who had lived here for generations, the people who had built this community when no one else would let them buy a home, could finally breathe a collective sigh of relief. We owned our future. The legacy of our parents and grandparents was no longer for sale to the highest bidder. It was a monumental, unprecedented victory against a system designed to push us out. Word of what I had done spread through the neighborhood with the speed of a summer wildfire. I had never sought out recognition, preferring to live my life as a quiet, retired mechanical engineer. But I quickly became a symbol of resistance and protection for my people. The community realized that Valerie and I had stood in the gap and fought off a multi-billion-dollar corporate invasion. To celebrate the establishment of the Community Land Trust, my neighbors organized a massive block party right on my street. It was a beautiful, vibrant Saturday afternoon. The air was thick with the rich, mouth-watering scent of barbecue smoke and the sound of classic soul music playing from large speakers set up on the corner. Children were running through the front lawns, their laughter echoing off the historic brick houses. Elderly couples sat on their porches drinking sweet tea and sharing stories completely free from the fear of displacement. Kendrick Hayes, the brilliant private investigator who had helped me expose the corruption, stood by my side near the grill holding a plate of ribs and laughing loudly at a joke told by one of the local mechanics. Sylvia Rossi even made an appearance, trading her sharp courtroom suits for a casual summer dress, smiling as residents continually walked up to thank her for her relentless legal work. I stood on my wraparound porch, the exact porch I had built with my own hands decades ago, and looked out over the sea of joyful faces. Neighbors came up to me one by one, shaking my hand, hugging me, and thanking me for saving their homes. It was a profound, deeply emotional validation. I felt Valerie present, standing right beside me, her spirit woven into the very fabric of the celebration. We had protected our sanctuary. The community was thriving, bound together by a renewed sense of unshakable solidarity. The darkness that Brent and his corporate backers had tried to bring to our doorsteps was completely vanquished by the brilliant, undeniable light of our shared resilience. The warm summer evening eventually turned into a peaceful, quiet night. The music faded. The neighbors went back to their safe, secure homes, and I sat alone on my porch, listening to the gentle hum of the crickets. I felt a profound, settling peace deep within my bones. The brutal war was finally over. I had honored my wife's legacy, protected my community, and reclaimed my entire life from the people who tried to destroy me. But even in the midst of this beautiful, hard-won tranquility, my mind briefly shifted to the one person who was glaringly absent from the neighborhood celebration. Somewhere across the city, miles away from the warmth and security of the streets she had so eagerly tried to pave over my daughter, was living a very different reality. The corporate empire she had betrayed me for was gone. The luxury she had craved had turned to dust. The peace I felt sitting on my porch was a stark, jarring contrast to the brutal existence she had built for herself. The story of my ultimate victory was inextricably linked to the story of her absolute ruin. And while my neighborhood thrived, I knew that the final chapter of Jada's miserable downfall was still playing out in the cold, unforgiving shadows of the city. 2 years have passed since that turbulent, exhausting chapter of my life finally closed. I am now 71 years old, and I can honestly say I feel healthier, sharper, and more vibrant than I did a decade ago. The heavy, suffocating anxiety that once plagued my days and haunted my nights has completely vanished, leaving behind a profound, settling tranquility. The physical toll of chronic stress is a very real, very dangerous thing, and lifting that toxic burden off my shoulders acted like a fountain of youth. My blood pressure is perfect. I sleep soundly through the night without a single disturbance. Every morning I wake up just as the sun begins to peek over the historic brick roof lines of our neighborhood. I brew a pot of strong black coffee, step out onto the wooden wraparound porch I built with my own 2 hands decades ago, and breathe in the crisp, clean air. The street is thriving in a way it has not seen in years. The community land trust we established has blossomed into a magnificent, impenetrable protective shield. We have seen young black families moving back into the area, buying homes that were previously targeted for corporate demolition and raising their children in the same yards where my generation played. We planted a lush community garden down the block, and the vacant dirt lots that Brent once salivated over are now beautifully landscaped parks filled with laughter and life. I spend my days tending to my property, keeping the lawn immaculate, and using my decades of engineering experience to fix minor mechanical issues for the elderly widows on the street. I am simply enjoying the profound peace of a life well lived. I have rebuilt my existence entirely on my own terms. My home is a sanctuary again. Valerie's presence is still here with me, not as a source of paralyzing grief, but as a warm, comforting memory that guides my daily actions. I sit in my rocking chair listening to the birds chirp in the old oak trees, and I know without a single shadow of a doubt that we won. We preserved our history, we protected our people, and we built an unbreakable fortress out of the pure, enduring love we shared. However, the universe has a very strict, undeniable way of balancing the scales, and karma is an exceptionally thorough debt collector. Earlier this week, I was walking back from the local hardware store after picking up some fresh soil and rose seeds for my front garden. The route took me near the bustling outskirts of the commercial district bordering our neighborhood. The streets were crowded with business professionals rushing to lunch and tourists enjoying the afternoon sun. As I waited at a busy crosswalk, I noticed a municipal maintenance crew working along the crowded sidewalk. One of the workers was pushing a heavy rusted utility cart filled with industrial cleaning supplies, dirty mops and overflowing trash bags. She was wearing a highly visible, oversized neon yellow safety vest over a cheap, heavily stained gray uniform. Her hair was pulled back haphazardly into a messy knot, and her posture was severely slumped under the crushing weight of physical exhaustion. It took me a long moment to recognize her. It was Jada, the woman who used to strut proudly through high-end boutiques in imported leather shoes. The woman who demanded VIP treatment at luxury corporate galas was now physically scraping discarded chewing gum off public transit benches and emptying municipal garbage cans in the sweltering heat. Her federal plea deal had likely required extensive, grueling community service. Or perhaps this backbreaking manual labor was simply the only legitimate job she could secure with a felony fraud conviction permanently attached to her name. She looked up from the hot pavement to wipe the sweat from her brow with a soiled rag, and her tired eyes locked directly onto mine. For a fraction of a second, time stood completely still amidst the chaos of the city. I saw the absolute crushing weight of her humiliation wash over her face like a tidal wave. She saw me standing there wearing a tailored wool coat, looking healthy, respected, and entirely at peace. She did not reach out. She did not call my name. She knew the bridge between us was burned to ash and scattered to the wind long ago. Jada quickly lowered her head, hiding her face behind the frayed brim of a cheap baseball cap, and gripped the plastic handle of her cleaning cart. She pushed it forward with all her remaining strength, shuffling away as fast as her aching feet could carry her, disappearing into the anonymous, unforgiving gray background of the city. I watched her walk away, feeling absolutely nothing but the cool autumn breeze against my face. That brief, completely silent encounter solidified the most important and profound realization of my entire life. There is a deeply flawed, highly dangerous assumption in our modern society that the kindness of the elderly is somehow a symptom of inherent weakness. People like Brent and Jada look at an aging man grieving the devastating loss of his wife, and they see an easy, defenseless target. They mistake our patience for ignorance. They confuse our silence for a lack of awareness. But they fundamentally fail to understand that a man who has survived over 70 years in a harsh, unforgiving world does not survive by being foolish or naive. We have seen predators before. We know exactly how to read the hidden malicious intentions behind a fake smile or a hollow compliment. My generation built actual structures from the ground up, fighting through systemic barriers, economic hardships, and racial prejudice that would completely crush the fragile, entitled minds of people who think true wealth is defined by leased sports cars and stolen credit cards. My kindness was a conscious choice. My patience was a deliberate gift. And the exact moment they decided to exploit that gift, they unleashed a calculated storm they were entirely unequipped to survive. The greatest tragedy of this entire ordeal was the persistent illusion of blood. For decades, I believed that biology was an unbreakable sacred bond. I believed that because Jada shared my DNA, she was inherently entitled to my endless forgiveness and my unconditional protection regardless of her actions. I was completely wrong. Blood only gives you a biological starting point. It does not give you a free pass to commit treason against your own heritage. Family is not defined by matching genetics or a shared last name on a birth certificate. Family is defined by absolute loyalty, mutual respect, and the unyielding willingness to protect one another when the world turns dark and hostile. My true family is the community that surrounds me now. My family is Kendrick, who stood by my side and risked his own safety to uncover the buried truth. My family is Sylvia, who wielded the law like a righteous sword to defend my home and my dignity. My family is Valerie, whose brilliant mind and fierce love were so incredibly powerful, they reached out from beyond the grave to shield me from total ruin. I am surrounded by people who honor my existence, and I will spend the rest of my days honoring theirs. I am not a victim. I am a survivor, a protector, and a man who successfully defended his legacy against those who sought to pave it over. I want to take a moment to sincerely thank every single one of you for listening to my story. It is not easy to share the darkest, most painful chapters of your life with the world, but I felt it was absolutely necessary to speak the truth. If my experience can serve as a warning or an inspiration to even one person out there facing a similar struggle, then retelling this nightmare was completely worth the effort. Never let anyone, no matter who they are, how much money they claim to have, or how closely they are related to you, mistake your kindness for weakness. Protect your peace fiercely, protect your legacy, and never be afraid to cut out the toxicity that threatens the foundation of your home. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts on everything that happened. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have handled the betrayal differently, or would you have executed the exact same plan? Please share your honest opinions with me in the comments section below and let me know which city, state, or country you are watching from today. I read through the comments, and your ongoing support means the absolute world to me. If you found value, strength, or satisfaction in my journey, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true life stories of justice, resilience, and survival. There are many more stories waiting for you here, stories of everyday people standing up to greed and reclaiming their lives. Until next time, stay strong, trust your instincts, and always remember your true worth. With love and respect, thank you for watching. Another profound lesson this ordeal cemented in my mind is the absolute necessity of quiet, strategic preparation. We live in a society that often praises the loudest voice, mistakenly equating arrogance with intelligence. Brent operated with flashy suits and loud threats, assuming his noise made him invincible. But true power is completely silent. It is the meticulous attention to detail and the foresight to build an impenetrable fortress before the enemy even realizes they are at war. Valerie taught me that the most devastating counterattacks are never born from explosive rage, but from cold, deliberate planning. Never broadcast your next move to people hoping to see you fail. If you have ever had to silently outsmart someone who severely underestimated your worth, hit the subscribe button and share your own victory in the comments below.